Hi guys and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we trudge into a world where the cold feels like a living thing, sneaking into every corner of cottages, curling around ankles, and whispering along the edges of walls made of rough timber and stone. You probably won't survive this, not without layers of wool, a roaring fire, and maybe a dash of luck from the weather gods. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, let me know in the comments where you are and what time it is right now, so we can all feel the rhythm of night and day together. Now, dim the lights, flow straight into the story. It is early morning in a medieval village, and the sun has not yet pierced the horizon. The snow lies thick over the fields, crisp and silent, muffling the usual sounds of farm life. You trudge through the frost that makes your boots crunch like brittle paper. Every breath clouds in front of your face, a fleeting ghost in the frigid air. The wind, sharp and impatient, snakes through hedgerows and empties streets of lingering smoke. Farmers already awake are moving like ghosts themselves. Arms tight against their chests, fingers red and stiff from the cold. They carry buckets of water or stacks of firewood, their movements slow, deliberate, conserving energy against the chill that seeps into bones. Historians still argue whether the medieval human body adapted physiologically to the cold, or whether sheer habit and practice were the only buffers against frostbite and fatigue. You notice that the cottages are almost all similar in construction, yet each has its own quirks. Some have walls of thick timber filled with wattle and daub, patched with mud to hold heat inside. Thatched roofs sag slightly under snow, like they are bowing to the weight of the winter. The doors are small and low, designed more to retain warmth than impress anyone walking by. Smoke curls from chimneys, pale and slow, hinting at the fire inside, the central hearth where families will gather for warmth and meals. It is easy to imagine how a single fire could dominate life in these villages, a lifeline against the relentless cold. A quirky tidbit is that some villagers would smear animal fat along windows or doors, an improvised insulation that smelled faintly like roasted meat but kept the drafts at bay. Inside the cottages, the smell is a mix of smoke, damp wool, and the lingering scent of yesterday's stew. You trudge across the earthen floor, feeling the cold rise through your shoes and into your toes. A family stirs near the fire, yawning and stretching. The mother lifts a pot from the embers, careful not to spill the thin broth inside. The father adjusts a bundle of straw under the youngest child, whispering reassurances that seem intended as much for himself as for the boy. Children rub their hands together, eyes sleepy but alert to every movement, knowing instinctively where warmth can be found. Mainstream historical fact tells us that family members often huddled together in beds piled with straw, sometimes with livestock nestled nearby to share body heat efficiently. You notice the smallest details, the way smoke swirls from the fire, lingering near the ceiling before dispersing, the way frost has etched delicate patterns along the window panes, the soft tapping of a goat's hooves on the floorboards as it shifts for warmth. Each sound is magnified in the stillness of early morning, and yet the world outside continues its harsh rhythm. Snow drifts silently across the yard, settling in patterns that look almost deliberate, as if the wind itself were sketching the landscape. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers relied more on observation of natural signs or on superstition to predict the severity of a coming winter. Some accounts suggest that farmers would check the thickness of frost on hedges or the patterns of smoke to decide when to bring animals inside or ration firewood. You trudge further into the kitchen area, noting the careful organization of firewood stacked near the hearth. Each log is chosen for burn quality, some seasoned longer, others freshly chopped. Peat, if available, is tucked in a corner, damp and heavy, ready to smoulder slowly. The fuel stores are precious, meticulously guarded. The mother scoops broth into a wooden bowl, the steam curling toward your face. Its warmth is immediate, a comfort against the creeping cold that clings to your shoulders. She adds a sprinkle of herbs, rosemary or thyme, which not only flavors the broth but is believed to offer protection against winter ailments. A quirky tidbit is that some families would hang bunches of herbs from beams or nails in doorways, thinking that scents could chase away invisible illnesses, or perhaps just mask the odors of the long nights with the smell of smoke and damp wool. Outside, the frozen fields stretch endlessly. You notice that the roads are more suggestion than structure. No covering ruts and mud alike. Travellers are rare this time of year, and when they do appear, their faces are pale, cheeks red from exposure, eyes squinting against the low winter sun. You imagine the isolation of a single family during a blizzard, hearing only the wind and the occasional crack of wood from the fire. Scholars still debate how much this isolation affected social structures, with some arguing that villages were tightly cooperative out of necessity, while others suggest that winter forced people to retreat into private spaces, cultivating a quieter, more introspective life. You trudge closer to the hearth, noticing how the room itself seems to bend around the fire's warmth. Straw mats on the floor, bundles of wool piled against walls, and the placement of furniture all serve a subtle purpose to conserve heat and protect the living space from drafts. The family moves with gentle deliberation, each step measured to conserve energy. You notice the youngest child's hands, red and raw from the cold, curling instinctively toward the fire. You realize how every aspect of life, from cooking to sleeping to walking across the frozen yard, is dictated by the quest to survive the night. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingled aromas of smoke, herbs, and cooking broth. The silence outside contrasts sharply with the subtle hum of activity indoors. Every footstep, every creak of timber, every exhale of breath seems amplified. You realize, almost reluctantly, that life in winter was a constant negotiation between warmth and cold, nourishment and scarcity, vigilance and fatigue. The family knows each pattern, each signal, each quirk of winter, and they move almost instinctively to meet its challenges. And as you settle near the hearth, watching the pale light of dawn spill through frost-lined windows, you sense the beginning of an understanding that survival is not merely about enduring temperature. It is about anticipation, about careful observation, about the subtle rituals that keep the body and spirit alive when nights stretch long and cold. You might shiver just thinking about it, but in that shiver, there is respect for the quiet courage it took to face each medieval winter. You probably won't survive this, but you can appreciate the ingenuity and patience it demanded, even in these first moments of the day, before the sun climbs fully. You can feel how every breath, every movement, every simple act of tending the fire or moving a bundle of straw is part of a larger choreography. Historians still argue whether these routines were learned behavior passed from parent to child or adaptations honed over generations. Perhaps it was a little of both, like the way you now, sitting here, sense patterns you never consciously noticed. You take another sip of the now slightly cooler broth, and it seems to anchor you. The warmth travels slowly through your chest, out to your fingers, settling into your toes. You watch smoke drift lazily upward, smell the faint tang of burned wood mixed with herbs, and hear the faint stirrings of a child trying to wake. Outside, frost continues its silent work, sculpting patterns in stillness, indifferent yet mesmerizing. You realize the day has begun, even in this frozen world, and that surviving, even for a moment, is an art shaped by centuries of quiet wisdom and unspoken rules. The fire crackles softly, the wind whispers through the gaps in the walls, and you, comfortably tucked near the warmth, begin to understand the rhythm of a medieval morning. You notice how the smallest details matter, how subtlety dominates. and how the cold itself teaches patience. You might still shiver, but it is a shiver informed by awe, by respect, by the slow unfolding of centuries of human adaptation. This is where it all begins, where your journey through the long nights of medieval winters takes root, and where you start to feel the intricate dance between human ingenuity and the merciless cold. You step outside just as the first hints of sunlight touch the frost-covered fields. The snow sparkles faintly, each flake catching light like tiny prisms, and the cold bites at your cheeks immediately. Your breath forms clouds that linger for a moment before drifting away, dissipating into the stillness of early morning. The village is quiet, except for the occasional creak of timber, the soft shuffle of boots in snow, and the distant lowing of cattle that have been brought in from the fields overnight. You trudge along a path that is little more than a suggestion, flattened only by repeated passage, snow muffling all other sound. The air is sharp with the scent of frozen earth, smoke, and the faint tang of livestock. Historians still argue whether villagers relied primarily on sensory cues from the landscape or on long-standing seasonal memory to anticipate a particularly brutal winter morning. You notice the subtle signs in the landscape almost instinctively. Frost clings in delicate, silvery patterns to hedgerows, curling around each twig like nature's own lacework. A stream nearby is mostly frozen, but thin ribbons of water snake through the ice, the sound of moving water almost swallowed by the snow. This small movement reminds you how life continues quietly beneath the frozen surface. A quirky tidbit is that some farmers believe that the direction in which frost formed on edges could predict the next day's weather, and they treated these observations with the same seriousness as counting sheep or checking grain stores. The village houses, in contrast, are snug and silent, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. You trudge past a cottage where the door is ajar, and the warm scent of cooking rises to greet you. Inside, someone stirs a pot of pottage, its thick aroma mingling with the resinous scent of firewood. Outside, you notice the frost has formed delicate feathers along the edges of the windows, and a thin layer of ice crusts the wooden doors. You trudge carefully over the icy steps, boots crunching, and wonder how villagers balance the need to leave the warmth of their hearth with the necessity of tending animals, checking fences, or delivering small messages to neighbours. You pause at a hedge, noticing the faint tracks of animals in the snow. A rabbit has moved cautiously along the edge of the field, its tiny footprints a reminder that life persists even in the harshest conditions. Ravens call once or twice, their voices carrying across the frozen expanse, and you realize how silence dominates everything else. In these early hours, the snow has a way of amplifying small sounds and muting the broader ones, shaping the world into a quiet, almost meditative place. Mainstream historical fact tells us that villagers often used these observations to determine if predators or stray animals had been near, influencing whether livestock needed extra attention before sunrise. You trudge toward a small hill that overlooks the village. From this vantage point, the frozen fields stretch in muted patterns of white and grey. Smoke rises from each chimney, a thin ribbon connecting the domestic world to the grey sky above. You notice the subtle movement of people emerging from doors, carrying buckets, firewood, or bundles of herbs. The coordination of these small tasks is crucial. Scholars still debate whether the efficiency of such routine was innate or cultivated over decades of living in unforgiving winter landscapes. You sense that, either way, each action is deliberate, honed by necessity and shaped by centuries of accumulated knowledge. As you descend the hill, the crunch of your boots against compacted snow mixes with the distant chatter of voices, muted by cold air. Children appear at doors, faces red and eyes bright, already aware that warmth is a commodity they cannot take for granted. They trudge to fetch water or help tend animals, moving with the blend of fatigue and instinctive energy that only the young possess. The adults, in contrast, seem heavier, more deliberate, as if their bodies carry not just the weight of coats and scarves, but the accumulated pressure of months of winter survival. A quirky tidbit here is that some villagers would wear extra layers even indoors, claiming that their bodies could not adjust to sudden warmth without shivering for hours afterward. You trudge past a frozen pond, where the ice reflects the pale sunlight like glass. Birds have left only faint traces in the snow, their absence almost more telling than their presence. The wind shifts slightly, carrying the faint odour of livestock pens and the earthy scent of thawing manure, signalling that activity will increase as the sun rises. Villagers will soon move into routines that blend domestic labour with care for animals, preparation of meals, and tending to fires that must remain alive throughout the day. Historians still argue whether the pace of these morning routines was dictated more by the clock of sunlight or by instinctive rhythm passed down from older generations. You notice how movement itself conserves warmth. Villagers trudge slowly, deliberately, often with hands tucked into pockets or sleeves, sometimes brushing snow off boots to prevent damp from chilling their feet. Every action, from carrying buckets of water to stacking firewood, is executed with awareness of body heat. You pause for a moment, inhaling the crisp, cold air. The quiet world around you seems almost sacred. Each detail amplified the crackle of a distant fire, the soft sigh of wind through bare branches, the rhythmic shuffle of feet across the snow. You trudge further toward the edge of the village, where fields have been cleared of last season's crops. The soil is frozen solid, furrows filled with snow. The skeletal remains of plants poke through, brittle and brown, reminding you how the land itself sleeps during winter. Farmers will soon begin planning spring work in subtle ways, checking soil, moving tools, and making mental notes of which areas might thaw first. A quirky tidbit is that some villagers would carry small bundles of soil from different fields into their homes, believing that the warmth of the house would encourage seeds to grow when spring arrived. You trudge past the first barns, where the faint smell of hay and animal warmth escapes through partially open doors. Inside, cows and goats huddle together, lowing softly, a living source of heat and companionship. You watch the farmers move carefully, feeding animals and ensuring water does not freeze in the troughs. These tasks, mundane to the outsider, are life itself here. Mainstream historical fact tells us that keeping animals close to homes in winter was common across Europe, sometimes even within living spaces, as body heat from animals could raise indoor temperatures significantly. As the sun climbs slowly higher, the village seems to wake fully. Smoke from multiple chimneys curls upward, carrying faint scents of pottage, herbs, and wet wood. You notice the interplay of warmth and cold, shadow and light, human movement and natural stillness. Each element signals a rhythm that has persisted for centuries. Scholars still debate how much of this rhythm was consciously managed versus instinctively felt, whether villagers planned each day around survival or merely responded to the relentless cues of winter. You, standing in the midst of it, begin to appreciate the subtlety of observation, the patience, and the care that underpins every action. And as you trudge back toward the heart of the village, toward the cottages and the first smells of breakfast, you sense how intimately life is entwined with the cold. Each step is deliberate, each breath a reminder of the constant negotiation between human endurance and environmental challenge. The day has begun, but already you feel the pulse of a rhythm that balances warmth and cold, motion and stillness, labor and survival. The frost, the smoke, the muted sounds, they are all part of a silent, ongoing dialogue between people and the winter world they inhabit. You step closer to the cottages, noticing the subtle variations in construction that reflect both tradition and resourcefulness. Some walls are wattle and daub, but their rough texture revealing layers of mud, straw and timber pressed together. Others are simple stone, uneven and pocked with frost, absorbing sunlight slowly as it warms the day. The thatched roofs sag gently under snow, their fibrous surfaces brushing against the cold air. You trudge around the edges, feeling the chill seep through your boots and tug at your fingers. Inside, families have already begun their routines, moving quietly to conserve warmth. Mainstream historical fact tells us that thick walls, low doorways, and compact layouts were essential in preventing heat loss during prolonged winter months. The air smells faintly of soaken wet wool, mingling with the lingering aroma of cooked grains from the previous evening. You notice that doorways are often covered with additional layers of cloth or straw, small attempts to trap heat inside. A quirky tidbit is that some villagers would hang animal skins behind doors or over windows, claiming they could keep not only warmth but also mischievous spirits at bay. You trudge carefully along the paths between cottages, crunching over frost that glints in the weak sunlight, observing the way smoke curls from chimneys and drifts lazily into the pale sky. You step inside one of the cottages, where the hearth dominates the room. The fire crackles softly, flames licking iron pots and warming the stones beneath your feet. Every surface is placed with intention. Benches and tables near the hearth, straw mats covering cold earth floors, wool blankets draped over low beds. The mother stirs a thick pottage, its steam carrying the aroma of onion, cabbage, and a hint of dried herbs. You notice the oldest child tending the fire, adjusting logs with care, aware that a well-fed flame is more than comfort, it is survival. Historians still argue whether these domestic arrangements were standardized across regions or varied significantly according to local climate and available resources. The family moves with the deliberate calm, each person aware of the rhythms that govern life in winter. You notice how bodies are arranged for maximum warmth, children close together on straw mattresses, adults nearby, and sometimes even a small goat nestled in a corner, contributing heat. A quirky tidbit is that some households would encourage animals to sleep near the hearth, believing that their warmth would prevent frostbite for the youngest children. You trudge around the edges of the room, observing how every motion seems slow, measured, conserving energy and heat simultaneously. Outside, snow blankets the fields, silent except for the faint creak of timber or the soft lowing of cows pressed against each other for warmth. You notice how the sun, though faint, catches each icy surface, creating small glimmers that dance across frozen mud and frost-covered straw. Villagers, fully aware of the cold's persistence, have already begun tending animals, moving firewood, and checking that water does not freeze in troughs or pots. Mainstream historical fact notes that careful observation of water and animal behavior was crucial. Frozen water or distressed livestock could be signs of more extreme weather approaching. You pause to watch the subtle details, frost curling around windows like delicate lace, smoke drifting from chimneys in soft spirals, and children bundled in thick wool moving cautiously across icy floors. These small moments speak of adaptation, of generations of learned practice in balancing heat, effort, and survival. Scholars still debate whether villagers relied more heavily on inherited knowledge or instinctive adjustments to winter conditions, suggesting a combination of both shaped daily life. Inside, the cottage walls are lined with hung herbs, small bundles of rosemary, thyme, and sage dangling above the hearth. They serve not only for the cooking but also for health, their aromas believed to ward off winter illnesses. You notice the intricate way blankets are folded over beds, how straw is layered on floors, and the strategic placement of benches and chests to block drafts. A quirky tidbit is that some families would use extra layers of rushes on floors to trap heat, creating a barrier between cold earth and bare feet. You trudge carefully, taking in the care embedded in these small actions, each one a quiet testimony to survival. The soundscape is equally deliberate. Outside, snow muffles footsteps and the clatter of tools. Inside, the soft crackle of fire and occasional scrape of wooden utensils provide rhythm to the morning. You notice that conversations are gentle, measured, conserving both heat and energy. Extreme historical fact shows that in many regions, villagers would speak in subdued tones indoors to avoid unnecessary exertion of breath, preserving warmth and maintaining a calm environment during the harshest hours of winter. You move toward the window and peer out, noticing how the cold seems to sculpt the landscape. Frosted hedgerows glint in pale sunlight. Paths are etched with footprints from animals and humans alike, and distant barns emit faint plumes of smoke. You realize that every element, the buildings, the hearths, the clothing, the arrangement of beds is part of a coordinated system designed to keep people alive. Historians still argue whether these systems evolved organically or were consciously taught, but the effectiveness is undeniable. The smell of cooking fills the room, mingling with smoke, wet wool, and a faint tang of wood smoke. You notice how heat radiates from the fire to every corner, and yet you can feel the chill that lingers near the door or window. Families adapt continuously, moving slightly to catch warmth, adjusting blankets or rotating positions on straw beds. A quirky tidbit is that some households would place warm stones in bedding to provide extra heat for children or the elderly. A simple innovation that could make a night more bearable. You observe the careful routines, wood chopped and stacked methodically, pails of water carried with precision, fire tended continuously. The adults move with a slow rhythm, conserving heat and energy. Children scurry quietly, aware of the patterns that allow warmth to persist in a home that is otherwise vulnerable to the elements. Mainstream historical fact tells us that such routines were critical. Without careful attention, a single cold snap could render a home unlivable for a day or more. Outside again, the village is coming to life. Snowflakes swirl faintly in the light breeze. Animals shift in their pens, and smoke rises steadily. You notice the coordination between houses, the subtle signals of movement, and the quiet understanding that winter demands vigilance. Scholars still debate how much of this vigilance was shared across a community or primarily managed within individual households. Either way, survival depended on observation, careful planning, and constant adjustment. And as you trudge back into the warmth of the cottage, the soft heat from the hearth wrapping around you, you begin to understand the quiet genius of medieval housing. Thick walls, low doors, compact layouts, and strategic use of textiles all serve to transform a frozen environment into a habitable space. You notice the care, the small details, and the attention to the invisible interplay of heat, cold, and life. You realize that every element, the smoke, the fire, the frost on the windows, the layers of blankets, is part of an ecosystem of survival. The morning continues, and you feel a rhythm settle over the village, quiet observation, deliberate movement, and a steady negotiation with winter's cold. You trudge past the hearth one last time, noting the glow, the steam, and the faint smell of herbs, and you recognize the heartbeat of a medieval morning, alive in the careful choreography of warmth and survival. You trudge back into the heart of the cottage, where the hearth radiates a warmth that seems almost tangible against the biting cold outside. The fire crackles softly, each ember a tiny sun, holding back the relentless winter. You notice the way smoke curls upward, twisting in lazy patterns before dissipating into the low ceiling, carrying with it the subtle scent of charred wood and lingering herbs. Interestingly, many medieval households believed that smoke itself offered protection, not only from cold but also from invisible illnesses that seemed to travel with the winter air. You step closer to the fire, feeling the heat slowly seep into your fingers and toes, and recognize that the hearth is not just a source of warmth but the nucleus of domestic life. The family gathers around, moving carefully to avoid drafts near the doorway. Children stir from straw mattresses, yawning and stretching, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. The mother ladles steaming pottage into wooden bowls, the aroma thick with onion, cabbage, and a hint of garlic. Researchers note that such thick, nourishing meals were essential for maintaining body heat and energy during long winter days, particularly when firewood was limited and fresh food scarce. You observe the smallest details, the way the father adjusts the firewood, rotating logs to maximize warmth, or how the eldest child arranges blankets around the younger siblings to conserve heat. Outside, the wind sculpts frost patterns along window panes, making delicate silver filigree that glints faintly in the morning light. Evidence indicates that medieval villagers paid close attention to these natural cues, often predicting temperature swings or impending storms based on subtle changes in frost formation or cloud movement. You trudge toward the window and notice a small plume of smoke rising from the distant barn, suggesting that the animals have been fed and bedding refreshed to preserve their warmth. The quiet precision of these actions reflects the intimate understanding humans had of winter's rhythms. You take a step back, listening to the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional creak of timber. Folklore claims that certain patterns of household sounds, like the crackle of fire or the low murmur of children, were considered signals of good fortune and protection against the harshest nights. You notice how even the smallest movements are intentional, each designed to maintain warmth and comfort without wasting energy. Some sources suggest that families would stagger tasks, alternating activity and rest, to ensure that the fire was tended while allowing some members to conserve energy and warmth. You glance at the walls and notice bundles of dried herbs hanging near the beams, rosemary, sage, and time-released gentle fragrances that mingle with smoke and the earthy aroma of wet straw. Academic discussion continues around whether these scents were valued primarily for their practical applications, such as mild antiseptic properties, or more for psychological reassurance in a long, cold winter. You observe the family moving around these bundles, often brushing past them unintentionally, yet always inhaling the faint protective aromas that have been part of domestic routines for generations. The children begin to stir more actively, helping to move small pots of water or brush away frost that has settled near the doorways. Unusual observations suggest that such early morning participation not only prepared them for daily chores, but also trained them to endure harsh conditions while conserving body warmth. You notice the youngest child clinging to a woolen blanket, tiny hands red but steady, eyes alert to every movement. You realize that the lessons of winter survival are taught subtly, almost imperceptibly, through observation and imitation rather than formal instruction. You step to the hearth again, observing how the family adjusts firewood, moves cooking pots, and shifts blankets to maximize warmth. Evidence indicates that fire management was a skill as critical as any other, balancing fuel economy with consistent heat. You notice that the adults converse in quiet tones, careful to avoid raising voices and wasting energy. Some sources suggest that such practices contributed to a slower, more deliberate rhythm in daily life, one shaped entirely by environmental pressures and practical necessity. A small goat nestled near the wall shifts, sending a faint puff of warm air into the room. Interestingly, many medieval households believed that animals contributed more than just warmth. They were companions and silent participants in the domestic strategy for survival. You watch as the mother adjusts straw mats under the children, smoothing folds and layering blankets. Scholars still debate whether these practices were universally adopted or varied significantly by region and household wealth, but the principle of maximizing heat with minimal effort is clearly evident. You notice the smell of pottage intensifying as the meal simmers, mingling with smoke, wet straw, and wool. Evidence indicates that such thick, nutrient-rich meals were essential not just for immediate sustenance, but for maintaining endurance against cold over extended periods. You observe how the family organizes their tasks, ensuring that each member contributes in ways suited to their strength and position within the household. Some sources suggest that even the placement of furniture, pots, and bedding was deliberately planned to enhance airflow, heat distribution, and efficiency. You step back, taking a moment to absorb the quiet rhythm of the cottage. Every sound, smell, and movement is purposeful, blending into an ecosystem of warmth and survival. Folklore claims that attentive observation of these patterns was thought to ward off misfortune, reinforcing behaviors that kept the household safe. You watch the family settle in around the fire, readying themselves for the day, and realize that the hearth is more than just a fire, it is a living heart, dictating the tempo, comfort, and security of those who live in its glow. The frost outside glistens in pale sunlight. The wind moans softly over snow-draped fields, and yet inside a subtle harmony prevails. The family moves like a well-tuned mechanism, each action balancing warmth, effort, and necessity. Evidence indicates that such domestic choreography was essential. The difference between enduring winter with health and energy or succumbing to cold and exhaustion. You step toward the doorway, pausing to inhale the mingled scents of smoke, herbs, and broth, realizing that the art of survival is not just physical but also sensory, shaped by centuries of observation, innovation, and adaptation. And as you watch them continue their careful morning routines, it becomes clear that life in the medieval cottage is a dance of warmth, rhythm, and subtle ingenuity. Each gesture, each movement, each breath is part of a delicate balance maintained in the face of relentless winter. Unusual observation suggests that the lessons learned here about patience to observation and subtle adjustment carry resonance far beyond survival, forming a quiet, enduring culture shaped entirely by the demands of a frozen world. You notice the way clothing defines every movement in the cottage. Woolen tunics layered over linen shirts wrap bodies in warmth, the fibers pressing gently against skin while still allowing flexibility. Socks are thick and often patched repeatedly, and even head coverings inside prevent precious heat from escaping. Evidence indicates that layering was more than comfort. It was essential for survival, particularly for children and the elderly, whose bodies were less able to maintain core temperature. You observe how the family adjusts garments throughout the morning, loosening layers near the hearth and tightening them before stepping outside. Outside, the frozen yard reflects pale light, and every step is deliberate, boots crunching through compacted snow. Some villagers carry baskets of firewood. Others tend to small animals sheltered near the cottages. Researchers note that clothing and body movement were considered inseparable, as wearing heavy wool without adjusting activity could lead to exhaustion, while moving lightly in insufficient layers risked frostbite. You watch the youngest child helping, bundled tightly, small fingers gripping tools and blankets with surprising coordination. Inside, the hearth continues to dictate the flow of activity. Steam rises from a pot of porridge, curling around the faces of those nearby. Some sources suggest that the scent of cooked grains and herbs had a psychological effect, providing comfort and the sense of safety that warmth alone could not guarantee. You notice the father adjusting logs in the fire, careful to maintain a steady heat, and the mother adding a small bundle of herbs to the simmering pot. A quirky observation is that some medieval cooks believed that certain herbs, when burned or boiled, could improve not only flavour, but also the household's ability to resist winter illnesses. You take in the room's textures, the roughness of timber walls, the softness of straw mats, the worn smoothness of wool blankets. Unusual observation suggests that families arrange their interiors with subtle intention, placing beds, mats, and benches to channel heat efficiently and reduce drafts. You notice that children instinctively know these arrangements, moving to the warmest spots and learning through observation how to preserve warmth without instruction. Experts continue to question whether this knowledge was formalized in any way or passed purely through experience, but the results are evident in the rhythmic flow of activity. The windows are covered with simple wooden shutters or layered cloth, blocking cold drafts. You notice frost patterns that seem almost decorative, delicate crystalline designs that catch the morning light. Some sources suggest villagers interpreted these formations as signs of coming weather, altering plans for tending animals or rationing fuel accordingly. You trudge closer to a window, observing how smoke from the chimney mingles with the cold outside, rising and twisting against the pale sky. This subtle interplay of heat and cold inside and outside forms a daily lesson in observation and adaptation. You glance at the children, noticing their hands and cheeks reddened by cold but moving with growing confidence. Folklore claims that repeated exposure to winter conditions trained the body and mind to endure harshness more effectively than modern insulation could. The eldest child feeds a small goat near the hearth, while the youngest watches, learning through imitation. Researchers note that such early responsibility not only strengthened resilience, but also taught strategic thinking about heat conservation, task sequencing, and household management. Steam rises from the cooking pot, carrying the mingled aroma of grains, cabbage, and herbs. The room feels alive yet deliberate. Movements measured to maintain warmth. A quirky tidbit is that some households would add a few warmed stones to bedding before children went to sleep, providing steady heat through the night. You notice the mother rotating blankets, smoothing straw mats, and checking the fire, her actions seamless and practiced. Almost instinctual, scholars still debate whether these strategies were common across all medieval regions or varied significantly depending on local climate and household resources. The fire crackles quietly, a comforting constant, while the family moves around it with a rhythm born of necessity. You trudge around the room, noticing how benches, tables, and chests are placed to block drafts and direct warmth where it is most needed. Evidence indicates that even small adjustments, like moving a chair or repositioning a blanket, could make a measurable difference in comfort and endurance. You notice the subtle way shadows play across the walls, flickering in the firelight, creating a sense of movement even in the stillness of morning. Outside, snow continues to glisten, the air crisp and sharp. You hear the faint scraping of a bucket against frozen water, the soft lowing of cows, and the quiet murmurs of villagers coordinating morning tasks. Some sources suggest that the ability to interpret these sounds and respond appropriately was as crucial as clothing or fire management in surviving long winters. You watch a neighbor trudge toward the village center, boots crunching and carrying a small bundle of firewood. Every action is deliberate, each movement contributing to the delicate balance of survival. Inside, warmth radiates from the hearth, the family working in harmony to maintain comfort and order. Unusual observation suggests that even seemingly minor tasks, like adjusting straw on the floor or rotating logs in the fire, were part of a carefully learned choreography that ensured both physical and emotional survival. The children observe, absorbing patterns that will carry them through future winters, while the adults demonstrate subtle expertise honed over years. You realize that every detail, from textiles to firewood to cooking routines, interlocks to create an environment that maximizes warmth, efficiency, and resilience. You trudge one final time across the room, noting the seamless flow of movement, the quiet coordination of bodies, and the careful management of resources. Researchers note that the interior arrangements, combined with clothing fire and daily routines, created a system that allowed medieval families to endure extreme cold with remarkable consistency. You watch as the mother stirs the pot one last time, adding a pinch of salt or herb, while the father checks the hearth for embers. The quiet confidence in their actions conveys a deep understanding of winter's demands, a knowledge that is both instinctive and cultivated. And as the morning light spreads slowly across the frost-covered fields outside, you trudge back towards the warmth of the hearth, sensing the intimate connection between human ingenuity and environmental challenge. The cottage, filled with the smells of cooking, the soft warmth of fire, and the steady rhythm of activity, becomes a living testament to adaptation, observation, and quiet endurance. You realize that surviving the cold was not a single act, but a symphony of coordinated efforts passed down through generations, shaped by necessity and refined by experience. You trudge toward the sleeping area, where straw-filled mattresses line the floor, each bundle carefully arranged for warmth. The children are still curled under thick-wool blankets, their breathing slow and steady, punctuated by the occasional shuffle or sigh. You notice how the adults have positioned themselves around the younger ones, creating a microclimate of shared body heat that extends across the room. Evidence indicates that proximity to others, especially children and livestock, was a deliberate strategy to maintain warmth through the long nights. You pause to observe the subtle patterns, how the blankets overlap, how the straw has been fluffed and rotated, and how the smallest details are designed to conserve precious heat. Outside, the wind pushes against the cottage walls, rattling shutters and carrying the faint smell of frozen earth and smoke. You trudge to a window and notice the frost patterns forming intricate shapes, delicate lacework tracing the edges of glass. Some sources suggest that villagers believe these formations could predict temperature changes, guiding decisions about when to tend animals, ration fuel, or adjust bedding. You watch smoke rising from distant chimneys, thin ribbons curling into the pale morning sky. Every household follows its own rhythm, yet all share the same objective: survival through the coldest nights. Inside, the hearth continues to radiate warmth, flames flickering softly as embers settle. A quirky observation is that some families would add small stones to the fire, then place them beneath blankets or straw to provide gentle, long-lasting heat for children or elderly members. You notice the mother adjusting one of these heated stones beneath the youngest child, careful to ensure comfort without overheating. Scholars still debate whether such methods were widely used or primarily regional innovations, but the principle of resourceful warmth is unmistakable. You trudge closer to the table where a small pot of porridge sits, still steaming. The smell is comforting, mingling with smoke, damp straw, and the faint aroma of wool. Researchers note that hot, nutrient-rich foods not only sustained physical energy, but also encouraged circulation, helping maintain temperature during periods of inactivity. The family moves in synchronized patterns. The father tends the fire, the mother stirs the pot and checks the bedding, and older children assist in minor tasks. You observe the careful choreography, every movement designed to maximize efficiency and comfort. The children begin to stir more actively, stretching and rubbing their hands against blankets. Unusual observation suggests that repeated exposure to cold combined with these daily rituals built resilience and taught them instinctively how to regulate warmth. You notice the youngest child's fingers red from the cold but moving with precision, guided by years of observed behavior. Some sources suggest that this hands-on education in heat management was considered as important as any formal instruction, a practical knowledge essential for survival. Outside, the snow crunches faintly under distant footsteps, and the lowing of livestock carries softly across the village. You trudge to the doorway, watching as a neighbor carefully moves a bundle of firewood toward their home. Evidence indicates that sharing observations, resources, and even small quantities of firewood was a common practice. Reinforcing social bonds and ensuring communal survival, you watch the smoke twist against the pale light, each plume marking an inhabited home, a place where warmth and activity persist despite winter's harsh grip. Inside, you notice how the family uses textiles not only for bedding, but also for insulation along walls and around doorways. A quirky tidbit is that some households would hang extra layers of cloth over windows, or even place blankets over gaps into the roof, an improviser's method of reducing drafts. You trudge carefully across the room, observing how these small additions create pockets of warmth. Subtly shaping the interior environment, scholars still debate the extent to which such techniques were standard practice or the result of individual ingenuity, but their effectiveness is evident in the calm comfort of the room. You step near the hearth again, feeling the gentle heat radiating from stones and logs. The adults move quietly, conserving energy, while children take small responsibilities, like fetching water or adjusting straw mats. Researchers note that such practices instilled a sense of agency and understanding of cause and effect, teaching children how their actions could contribute to the household's warmth. You notice the mother rotating blankets again, smoothing straw and ensuring that the heat circulates efficiently, a practice repeated countless times over generations. Outside, the day begins to brighten slightly, the sun filtering through clouds, glinting off icy surfaces. You trudge back to the interior, noting the interplay of light and shadow, warmth and cold. Evidence indicates that medieval families learned to manipulate space and materials in subtle ways, moving furniture to block drafts, positioning beds near heat sources, and layering textiles to create effective insulation. You watch the careful balance maintained within the cottage, the rhythm of activity and rest intertwined with environmental cues. You notice small signs of adaptation everywhere, children adjusting clothing, adults distributing firewood, and even animals shifting to optimize shared warmth. Unusual observations suggest that these micro-adjustments were vital, as they allowed a household to endure long nights without exhausting fuel or energy. You pause to take in the quiet scene, the soft glow of embers, the muted light from frost-covered windows, the faint aroma of broth and herbs, and the rhythmic movements of those who have mastered the delicate art of winter survival. You trudge towards the corner of the room where a small pile of straw has been prepared for the youngest child. Folklore claims that careful attention to straw layering not only improved warmth but also ensured health, reducing the risk of ailments associated with damp and cold floors. You observe the child curling into the bedding, the warmth from the hearth and shared body heat already making a subtle difference. Some sources suggest that these seemingly simple routines represent centuries of accumulated wisdom, a continuous adaptation to environmental pressures and human needs. The family begins to settle into the day's rhythm, moving between fire, bedding, and cooking with quiet efficiency. Researchers note that the combination of textiles, heated stones, shared body warmth, and hot food created a sophisticated thermal strategy that required constant observation and adjustment. You watch each action, each small motion, recognizing that survival in winter was not only physical but also deeply cognitive, a practiced awareness of heat, comfort, and endurance. And as you trudge toward the window again, watching the frost glint and the smoke drift lazily from multiple chimneys, you sense the harmony of adaptation and routine. The cottage is alive with subtle activity, every detail reinforcing the ongoing struggle against cold. Unusual observation suggests that this balance, maintained daily, formed the foundation for resilience and comfort, allowing families not merely to survive but to endure with measured confidence through long medieval winters. You trudge into the shared sleeping area, noticing the quiet arrangements that shape life during the coldest hours. Children are tucked into straw mattresses lined with layers of wool, their small bodies pressing close together to share heat. Historical insight tells us that shared sleeping arrangements were common across medieval Europe, a deliberate adaptation to conserve warmth when fuel was scarce. You notice how adults position themselves around the children, creating small pockets of body heat that ripple outward. subtly influencing the temperature of the room. The air carries a mix of smoke, herbs, and the faint scent of damp straw. You move slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of warmth. Interestingly, some families placed heated stones wrapped in cloth beneath the bedding, providing gentle heat throughout the night. The practice seems simple, yet it represents a sophisticated understanding of heat retention and human comfort in a time without modern insulation. You watch a small goat shift in the corner, contributing its own body heat to the room's warmth, an unassuming but essential participant in the household's thermal strategy. Outside, the landscape is muted under a thick layer of snow. Tracks of animals and humans mark the frozen earth, telling quiet stories of the night's activity. Researchers note that villagers often interpreted these traces to assess the condition of animals, the likelihood of thawing, or potential threats from predators. You trudge to a window and notice the sun rising slowly, reflecting off icy fields in pale glimmers. The world outside seems both beautiful and unforgiving, a constant reminder of why indoor warmth is a matter of life and careful planning. Inside, the family moves with a soft rhythm. The mother stirs a pot of thick pottage, releasing steam that warms the surrounding air. You notice the precision with which tasks are executed. Logs rotated in the fire, blankets adjusted, straw fluffed, water stirred to prevent freezing. Records indicate that such routines were crucial not only for warmth but also for health, reducing the likelihood of colds, fevers, and the ailments associated with prolonged exposure to cold, damp conditions. You observe the quiet cooperation between adults and children, a choreography perfected over generations. The children begin to wake, rubbing their eyes and stretching. Unusual observation shows that even simple acts like adjusting a blanket or moving closer to a heat source were taught almost by instinct, with younger members learning from older ones through imitation rather than explicit instruction. You watch as the eldest child fetches a small pail of water, careful to avoid spilling onto the cold floor, and notice the subtle attention to detail that defines life in winter. Smoke rises from the hearth, curling toward the low ceiling and carrying faint aromas of herbs and cooked grains. Folklore claims that hanging bundles of rosemary or sage could protect the household from illness, while also adding comfort through scent. You notice how these small rituals, blending practical and symbolic purposes, contribute to a sense of safety and continuity within the family. Evidence suggests that these practices varied by region but shared the same core goal: maintaining health, warmth, and morale during harsh winter months. You trudge around the room, observing the clever use of textiles. Blankets are layered over beds and along walls, creating insulated zones that reduce heat loss. A quirky observation is that some families even hung spare clothing along the ceiling or walls to trap heat, an improvisation born from necessity that highlights medieval ingenuity. You notice how the placement of furniture, bedding, and tools create small pockets of warmth, each carefully adjusted as the morning progresses. Outside, the village remains quiet except for the faint movements of animals and the occasional footstep of neighbors tending their own fires. Researchers note that such quiet mornings were a universal feature in winter, allowing both humans and livestock to conserve energy until sunlight and heat could assist daily activity. You watch smoke rising from distant cottages, each wisp marking a home alive with motion, warmth, and survival strategies honed over decades. Inside, the family prepares for the day ahead. Hot pottage is served in bowls, hands wrapped carefully around the wood to avoid burns. Evidence suggests that nutrition played a dual role, fueling the body for work and maintaining internal warmth through digestion and energy expenditure. You notice the subtle way everyone interacts, conserving heat, coordinating movements, and ensuring that the youngest members remain comfortable. You trudge to a corner where straw mats have been arranged for daytime rest. The mother adjusts them, layering blankets and smoothing surfaces. Historical insight reminds us that medieval households optimized every surface for warmth, with bedding, floors, and furniture working together to minimize energy loss. You pause to absorb the gentle rhythm, fire crackling, steam rising, soft footsteps across straw, the mingled scents of herbs, smoke, and food creating a comforting cocoon against the winter outside. And as the children begin their small chores, moving closer to the fire or tending the animals, you notice the quiet intelligence in every action. Each motion, from adjusting bedding to rotating logs, demonstrates an accumulated understanding of heat, energy, and human endurance. Evidence suggests that this careful choreography was essential. The difference between a day survived comfortably and one that left the household exhausted and chilled. You take a moment to appreciate the subtle balance, the living art of warmth and survival crafted across generations, and realize how deeply human ingenuity is embedded in these quiet winter routines. You trudge toward the kitchen area, where the soft glow of embers warms the room and fills the air with a comforting mix of smoke and the scent of cooking. The mother stirs a pot of thick pottage, releasing steam that curls lazily into the colder air near the walls. Researchers note that consistent exposure to hot and nutritious food helped maintain body temperature and energy, especially during the long, dark months when daylight was scarce and work continued regardless of frost. You notice the careful layering of blankets and mats on the floor, the adults adjusting straw and wool to ensure children remain insulated even while performing morning chores. Outside, frost glitters along the hedgerows and fence lines, tracing delicate patterns as if winter itself were sketching onto the landscape. You trudge past the frozen yard, boots crunching on snow, noticing the subtle sounds of life, a goat shifting in its stall, the faint scrape of hooves and distant calls of ravens. Evidence suggests that villagers closely observed these cues to anticipate temperature changes, frozen water, or signs that animals might require additional care. You pause to watch how the smoke from chimneys rises and disperses, an ever-present signal of activity and survival within the cottage. Inside, the family moves with a quiet purpose. You notice how the father tends the fire, rotating logs and ensuring embers remain vibrant, while the mother distributes portions of pottage into wooden bowls. Interestingly, some households would add small bundles of aromatic herbs directly to the fire, believing that the scent encouraged health and vitality for everyone present. The children assist where they can, learning instinctively the rhythm of preparation, the placement of logs, and the care necessary to avoid accidents in the warm but sometimes cramped space. You trudge toward the doorway to watch the morning light shift across the frozen fields. The roads are barely visible under snow, yet tracks indicate the movement of people and animals alike. Historical insight reminds us that during severe winters, travel was limited and risky. So much of daily life revolved around the immediate household. Villagers relied on careful planning, ensuring that firewood, food, and water were rationed effectively, while livestock and bedding were managed to maximize warmth. You see a neighbor moving cautiously across a yard, balancing firewood, their silhouettes softened by frost-laden air. Inside, blankets are readjusted and straw is fluffed. Some sources suggest that medieval families rotated bedding periodically to maintain consistent warmth, a practice observed across multiple regions. You notice the delicate choreography, children moving closer to the fire, adults shifting seating on mats, and small animals positioned near the hearth to supplement heat. Unusual observation indicates that this interwoven network of warmth, motion, and observation allowed households to endure extreme cold without modern conveniences. The aroma of the cooking pot intensifies, a blend of grains, herbs, and the faintly sweet smell of broth, simmering slowly. Evidence suggests that such sensory cues played a role in signaling readiness. encouraging mealtime coordination and providing psychological comfort against the monotony of long winter days. You observe the way the firelight reflects across polished wooden surfaces, the shadows flickering on walls lined with hanging herbs and textiles. A quirky observation is that some households would deliberately rearrange furnishings around the hearth daily, believing that the fire's warmth circulated more effectively when space was slightly altered. Outside, the wind moves over snow-laden fields, making distant tree branches groan faintly, while smoke curls from chimneys in lazy spirals. You trudge back inside, noting how the cottage interior contrasts with the harshness outside. Folklore claims that the sound of the wind against the roof was interpreted as a warning of worsening conditions, guiding when to increase firewood consumption or adjust bedding. You notice how even minor actions, like shifting a blanket or adding a log to the fire, are performed with precision and care, creating a system of micro-adjustments that maintain comfort over long hours. You observe the children sitting near the fire after their chores, hands warmed on wooden bowls. Researchers note that heat from shared meals, body proximity, and fire itself created a layered approach to thermal stability. The youngest child shifts slightly, moving closer to a heated stone tucked under a blanket, and the family collectively adjusts around the added warmth. You notice how instinctive these movements are, an interplay of experience, observation, and necessity. The father checks the smoke and embers, ensuring the fire is steady, while the mother maintains the pot and stirs gently. Evidence suggests that maintaining consistent heat was as much about timing and rhythm as it was about fuel. You watch the family in motion, recognizing the subtle awareness of temperature, energy expenditure, and human endurance. Each small act rotating logs, fluffing straw, layering blankets reveals the intricate knowledge embedded in daily survival routines. You trudge one final time around the hearth area, taking in the layered textures, muted colors, and warm scents of the cottage. Unusual observation indicates that these combined strategies, from textiles to firewood to positioning of bodies and animals, represent a comprehensive approach to enduring winter nights. You realize that what may seem mundane is, in fact, an elegant, interdependent system of human ingenuity, observation, and adaptation. And as the morning stretches on, the family settles into its pattern, balancing chores, warmth, and food, with each member performing their role seamlessly. You notice the subtle harmony between human effort and environmental challenge, the quiet intelligence that allows survival in a season defined by frost, wind, and long nights. Historical insight reminds you that such careful management of resources and energy was not optional, but essential. The cornerstone of winter endurance for centuries. You trudge out into the yard where frost clings stubbornly to every surface and the sun casts a pale, muted glow across frozen fields. The cold is immediate and sharp, biting at your cheeks and slipping under your layers. Evidence suggests that medieval farmers timed their outdoor work carefully, performing essential tasks during the sunniest, least frigid parts of the day to reduce exposure. You notice tracks in the snow footprints from neighbors, the light impressions of animals, and realize that every trace tells a story of movement, survival, and vigilance. You trudge along the path to the barn, where the smell of hay and animal breath rises into the morning air. Researchers note that bringing animals close to the living quarters was a common practice, as their body heat could supplement human warmth while also providing fresh milk and labor when needed. A quirky observation is that some households would allow goats or sheep to sleep in small stalls within the main living area, a practice that seems uncomfortable to modern sensibilities but was highly practical. The lowing of cows and the shuffle of hooves create a soft background rhythm, a reminder that life persists even in bitter cold. The barn door creaks as you push it open, the smell of wet straw and animals flooding your senses, You notice that hay is layered carefully, dry at the top but slightly damp underneath, a method that insulates while keeping moisture from freezing. Folklore claims that certain placements of hay could predict a mild or harsh winter, with older generations insisting that observation of texture and smell could guide preparations for fuel and bedding. You trudge around the animals, noting how they shift collectively to conserve heat, leaning against each other in a natural arrangement perfected over time. Inside the cottage, the family continues to manage indoor warmth. The fire crackles with steady energy, and steam rises from the pot of pottage. Researchers note that distributing heat evenly required both skill and attentiveness, particularly when fuel was limited and each ember mattered. You notice how adults move with deliberate slowness, conserving energy while ensuring that the fire remains optimal. Evidence suggests that even minor inefficiencies, such as overloading the fire or letting embers die prematurely, could result in discomfort or cold throughout the household. You trudge outside again to inspect the garden and surrounding fields. Frost-coated earth stretches in undulating lines, broken only by hedgerows and frozen irrigation ditches. Historical insight reminds us that these fields were not abandoned in winter. Villagers monitored them carefully, ensuring that buried crops like root vegetables remained insulated under straw or soil. You notice subtle mounds in the snow, evidence of buried provisions, carefully tended to prevent freezing. The silence of the landscape is profound, broken only by wind-shifting branches and the distant call of a crow. Inside, the children sit closer to the fire after completing minor chores. Some sources suggest that positioning younger members near the hearth during idle periods was both practical for warmth and essential for teaching them observation skills. You notice how they mimic adult movements, adjusting blankets and moving closer to heated stones without instruction. A quirky observation is that some households use small cloth dolls or toys placed strategically near the fire to teach children the importance of warmth, blending play with practical education. You trudge toward the water pail, noticing that thin ice has formed along the surface. Evidence indicates that villagers employed careful techniques to prevent freezing, such as adding small amounts of hot water periodically or covering the containers with cloth. You lift a small portion carefully, feeling the immediate chill, and transport it back inside for cooking and cleaning. Researchers note that water management in winter was often more critical than fuel or food, as dehydration and lack of warm water could quickly undermine health and endurance. The smell of cooked grains and herbs fills the air. Interestingly, some families would add small quantities of warming spices, such as mustard seed or dried ginger, to help stimulate circulation and provide psychological comfort. You notice the subtle interplay of heat sources, fire, heated stones, body warmth, and steam from cooking together. They create a multi-layered approach to thermal regulation that is both practical and sophisticated. Outside, the snow reflects light across the village, while the low hum of human and animal activity continues. You trudge along the perimeter of the cottage, observing how barns, fences, and hedgerows help block wind and conserve warmth around living spaces. Historical insight indicates that these structural strategies were just as important as indoor arrangements for maintaining comfort and survival during harsh winters. Turning inside, you take a moment to watch the household work in quiet harmony. Each task, from stirring pottage to arranging straw, contributes to a delicate ecosystem of warmth. Evidence suggests that these carefully observed routines, passed down through generations, allowed families to endure months of bitter cold with minimal risk of illness or fatigue. You notice the rhythm of movement, the way bodies shift instinctively toward heat, and the subtle coordination that keeps the household functioning efficiently. And as the morning stretches further, the combination of indoor ingenuity, animal companionship, careful observation, and structured activity reveals the profound wisdom embedded in these households. Researchers note that survival in winter was never accidental. It was the product of centuries of experience, adaptation, and an intimate understanding of the rhythms of nature, people, and fire. You trudge toward the village market, noticing immediately that the usual bustle is tempered by winter's grasp. Stalls are sparse, the air carrying faint scents of dried herbs, smoked meat, and livestock, but the clamour and chaos of warmer months is muted. Historical insight indicates that medieval markets contracted significantly in winter, with fewer merchants travelling and limited goods available, forcing villagers to plan carefully for trade and sustenance. You watch your father and oldest sister navigate the frozen paths beside a small handcart carrying eggs, scraps of smoked pork, and rough wool cloth, each item essential for barter and survival. The frost-covered road crunches under your boots, and you notice how villagers conserve energy, moving deliberately, careful not to slip or expend unnecessary effort. Researchers note that limited mobility during winter shaped not only daily routines but also social interactions. As travel was risky and even short journeys demanded preparation, you glance at distant stalls where merchants are setting up, their movements cautious and economical, aware that one misstep or a frozen wheel could disrupt trade entirely. Inside the market, the smell of smoke from cooking fires mingles with the tang of leather and the faint sweetness of dried fruit. Interestingly, some vendors would place small bundles of herbs near their goods, claiming that the scent attracted customers and warded off illness at the same time. You observe villagers examining items carefully, sometimes running hands over wool to check for dampness or inspecting eggs for cracks, each action informed by experience and necessity. Evidence suggests that these subtle inspections were crucial in a season when every item could affect the family's well-being. You notice that the crowd is smaller, with gaps between clusters of people, and the usual din of shouting and animal noise is subdued. Some sources suggest that this reduction in activity was both a practical and psychological adaptation, allowing villagers to conserve energy while avoiding the stress of overcrowded, frigid spaces. You watch a wagon pass slowly, barrels covered in canvas, and realize how curiosity mixes with caution. Such a sight could be rare during deep winter, highlighting the scarcity of transport and goods. Outside, snow drifts softly across the open spaces between stalls. You trudge carefully, balancing your cart, noticing faint footprints from earlier visitors. Historical insight shows that villagers paid attention to these subtle patterns, often using tracks to anticipate who might arrive next, whether a neighbouring family, a travelling merchant, or someone bringing news from the wider world. You inhale the crisp air, carrying hints of wood smoke and animal warmth from nearby pens. Inside a stall, you notice careful arrangements of textiles and small foodstuffs. Unusual observation indicates that the placement of goods was strategic, keeping perishable items away from drafts and heavier, sturdier product. Closer to warmth. You watch the merchant rotate a small pan of heated milk, demonstrating attentiveness to both product quality and household consumption. Some sources suggest that such meticulous care was learned through observation and necessity rather than formal instruction, a skill passed quietly from generation to generation. You trudge further, noticing the way villagers communicate softly, gestures substituting for loud speech to conserve heat and avoid fatigue. Interestingly, children sometimes carried small messages or helped maneuver like goods, learning both practical skills and social norms from these early tasks. You observe how these routines, small and easily overlooked, support the larger rhythm of survival, balancing warmth, energy, and resource management. The sun reflects off icy surfaces, creating a muted sparkle that illuminates frozen puddles and frost-laden ruts. Researchers note such environmental cues were closely monitored, as they influenced not only movement but also decisions about which roads were passable and which might trap unwary travellers. You notice a neighbour adjusting a wheelbarrow that has frozen slightly to the ground, his movements careful and patient. Evidence suggests that minor improvisations like these were essential, allowing people to navigate treacherous paths without wasting energy or risking injury. Inside the market, you observe merchants interacting, trading goods, and negotiating prices in hushed tones. Folklore claims that the first person to arrive at a stall could secure better goods, a belief that shaped the timing of travel and daily routines. You notice how both buyers and sellers conserve heat through posture and movement, leaning close to the fire or keeping hands tucked under layers of clothing. Each decision, each shift, demonstrates an intricate understanding of winter survival in public spaces. You trudge to the edge of the market, noting how small courtyards and alleys provide temporary shelter from wind, while also guiding traffic towards central stalls. Historical insight indicates that the design of medieval markets often accounted for environmental challenges, with natural windbreaks and covered spaces helping vendors and buyers endure cold mornings. You watch the family gather the traded goods, balancing their haul with care, aware that every item represents both nourishment and security for the household. Finally, you pause to absorb the sensory landscape, the soft crunch of snow, the warm aromas mingling with cold air, the faint murmur of voices, and the rhythmic movement of animals and people alike. Researchers note that such awareness, combining observation of surroundings with careful planning and movement, was essential for effective winter survival. You realize that even in the apparent simplicity of a small market trip, each action is part of a complex strategy, a blend of practical skill, social cooperation, and instinctive adaptation honed over generations. You trudge toward the edge of the village, where the sound of hesitant footsteps announces the approach of strangers. Snow muffles their movements, but you can hear the soft scrape of shoes and the faint tap of a knuckle against a door. Historical insight shows that during winter, begging or requesting aid was often muted and careful, reflecting both fatigue and social norms. You notice the family around the hearth stiffen subtly, pausing mid-task, aware that even a small interruption could bring danger if not handled thoughtfully. You trudge closer to the door, observing the scene. An old woman stands in layered, frost-covered wool, a young boy clutching an empty sack beside her. Evidence suggests that winter heightened both need and compassion. Villagers often balance scarce resources carefully, sharing when possible, but always wary of exhausting their own supplies. You notice the mother adjusting her shawl before opening the door slightly, inviting only what could be safely offered while maintaining household warmth and security. Inside, the hearth crackles softly, warming the air while children watch from blankets. Interestingly, some families employed subtle rituals when receiving strangers, like offering small portions or whispered blessings, blending practical care with superstition. The smell of pottage rises, comforting and rich, as if to reassure both visitors and household members that warmth and sustenance remain. You trudge back slightly to observe how each motion, each glance is carefully measured, balancing generosity with survival instinct. The boy looks uncertain, shifting from foot to foot, the sack held tightly. Researchers note that children were often taught discretion in such exchanges, learning the delicate negotiation between need and prudence. The old woman speaks softly, her words gentle and hesitant, asking if any broth remains. Some sources suggest that in harsh winters, these small requests could decide whether a family survived for another day, making every interaction both socially and materially significant. You trudge inside, noticing the family move in coordinated rhythms. The mother ladles a small amount of pottage into a separate bowl, offering it without disrupting the household routine. Evidence indicates that managing such interactions without losing warmth or exhausting fuel was a crucial skill. The children remain quiet, their curiosity tempered by the learned understanding that winter demanded patience, observation, and restraint. Outside, wine sculpts patterns in the snow, softening footprints and muffling further sounds. Unusual observation suggests that even the timing of visits was influenced by environmental conditions. People often waited until daylight or slightly warmer moments to approach neighbours, reducing the risk of exposure and increasing the likelihood of receiving aid. You trudge closer to the doorway, observing how body heat, fire, and careful task management converge in a single, delicate moment of social interaction. Inside, the family distributes warmth and food with minimal fuss. Historical insight reminds us that communal survival in winter required both generosity and prudence, a balance learned through experience rather than instruction. You notice how the fire's heat seems to extend outward, subtly shared with the visitors, while the household maintains its own microclimate of warmth. A curious detail is that in some villages, the positioning of guests near the hearth was almost ritualized, maximizing both warmth and social cohesion. You trudge slightly to the side, observing the old woman and boy consume the offered food carefully, their movements slow and deliberate. Researchers note that rationing during winter was as much about timing as quantity. Even a small portion could sustain hope and energy if handled wisely. The children watch quietly, learning not only about generosity but also about resource management, observation and strategic behavior in a season defined by scarcity. The room smells of smoke, herbs, and cooked grains, a layered scent that comforts both visitors and residents alike. Folklore claims that offering food in silence or under a protective charm could ward off misfortune or illness. You notice how the family moves with subtle coordination, maintaining warmth while providing sustenance. The rhythm of their actions almost imperceptible yet profoundly effective. You trudge back to the hearth, observing how each element, the fire, the textiles, the careful sharing of resources, and the quiet management of human interaction contributes to survival. Evidence suggests that winter required both skill and empathy, blending practical knowledge with subtle social intelligence. You realize that even a simple act of charity involves observation, timing, and an intricate understanding of both human behavior and environmental conditions. And as the visitors leave, the household settles again into its rhythm. The fire crackles softly, blankets are adjusted, and the aroma of pottage fills the room, signaling the continuation of daily life. Researchers note that these carefully orchestrated interactions, repeated across countless households, formed the foundation of community resilience, teaching lessons of generosity, prudence, and observation that were essential for enduring long medieval winters. You trudge back into the cottage, sensing the weight of morning settling into quiet routine. The reeve approaches the door, a tall figure carrying a wax tablet tucked beneath his cloak. Frost clings to his boots and hems, leaving tiny puddles on the threshold as he steps carefully inside. Historical insight indicates that the manorial system required peasants to deliver goods, labour, or payments, and collection visits like this were a predictable yet tense part of rural life. You notice the family stiffen subtly, not from fear exactly, but from the deep understanding that the reeve's attention is thorough, leaving little unnoticed. Inside, the warmth of the hearth contrasts sharply with the chill brought in by the visitor. Researchers note that these inspections could influence both material resources and household routines. Families adjusted meticulously to ensure that stores of grain, firewood, and meat were sufficient. The reeve stamps snow from his boots, and the faint smell of horse and damp parchment fills the room. A curious detail is that some peasants would hide small reserves in clever ways, such as beneath floorboards or behind hearth bricks, blending practicality with subtle defiance. You trudge around the room, observing the careful distribution of attention. The reeve's eyes move quickly across the space, taking in bread stores, hanging meat, and stacked firewood. Some sources suggest that this level of scrutiny reinforced order, social hierarchy, and agricultural accountability, creating a rhythm that villagers had learned to anticipate. The family adjusts subtly around the fire, ensuring that warmth is preserved without appearing tense or hurried. A delicate balance of observation and adaptation. The children remain near the hearth, quiet and attentive, watching the adults navigate the interaction. Folklore claims that the presence of authority figures near the fire required ritualized politeness and careful behavior, a cultural norm intertwined with the practical demands of winter. You notice the faint smell of herbs and smoke, a comforting presence that seems to buffer the household against stress and chill. Evidence indicates that such rituals, though subtle, were crucial in maintaining both social harmony and physical comfort during inspections. Outside, snow continues to drift softly across the yard, quiet except for the occasional scrape of the Reeves' boots. You trudge toward the window, noting the smoke from other cottages rising in pale spirals, and recognize that observation extends beyond a single household. Historical insight shows that communities monitored each other carefully, ensuring collective survival and accountability, while subtly balancing cooperation and self-preservation. The frozen landscape contrasts with the warmth inside, reinforcing the importance of routine, preparation, and vigilance. Inside, the family moves methodically. The mother adjusts blankets, the father shifts a log in the fire, and the children settle more comfortably near the warmth. Researchers note that movement and proximity were finely tuned. Every adjustment contributed to preserving heat, maintaining composure, and minimizing stress during inspection. A quirky observation is that some households would subtly position herbs, bread, or tools to create an impression of abundance, a small psychological strategy to ease the tension of authority visits. You trudge closer to the hearth, absorbing the layered sensory experience, the soft crackle of embers, the scent of herbs, smoke, and the muted rhythm of cautious conversation. Some sources suggest that these environmental and social cues helped villagers maintain equilibrium, reducing anxiety and allowing them to manage both heat and behavior with precision. You notice the subtle choreography of the family, coordinating warmth, movement, and attention in a single, integrated flow. The Reeve nods towards the father, asking about obligations and stores. Evidence indicates that such inquiries could affect not only the immediate household, but also planning for fuel, food, and labor over coming weeks. You watch the father respond calmly, gestures precise and deliberate, while the mother maintains the fire and monitors the children. You realize that every glance, every word, and every movement has been honed over repeated encounters, a careful negotiation of survival and compliance. You trudge to the back of the room, observing the interplay of fire, straw, and textiles. Researchers note that strategic placement of blankets and mats during authority visits was a learned skill, ensuring comfort without exposing vulnerability. A curious detail is that some families would shift livestock or even small storage containers to maintain both warmth and a sense of preparedness. Blending practicality with subtle psychological reassurance. The room is warm now, yet the presence of the Reeve keeps energy measured and movement deliberate. Folklore claims that careful adherence to household order during inspections was considered essential to attract favor and avoid misfortune. You notice how the family's routine continues seamlessly, integrating chores, warmth, and observation into a rhythm that sustains both physical survival and social harmony. Outside, the snow reflects faint sunlight, soft and cold. You trudge one last time around the interior, absorbing the balance of fire, heat, and careful human orchestration. Evidence suggests that households surviving winter successfully combined routine, observation, and subtle social intelligence, turning a potentially stressful visit into a controlled and manageable experience. You see the quiet mastery in the household's movements, an intricate dance between authority, warmth, and endurance. And as the Reeve departs, leaving the door slightly ajar, The household resumes its natural rhythm, fire tending, straw adjusting, children moving toward warmth, and meals continuing as quietly as possible. Researchers note that these repeated practices were essential, creating resilience that allowed medieval families to endure both environmental and social pressures simultaneously, maintaining warmth, comfort, and survival through harsh winter months. You trudge through the cottage, noticing that today feels slightly brighter than yesterday. Sunlight filters weakly through frost-lined windows, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily in the warm glow of the hearth. Historical insight shows that the interplay of light and heat was crucial. Even weak sunlight could subtly increase indoor temperatures and improve mood during long winter days. You observe the mother stirring a thick stew, its aroma rich with herbs, meat, and winter vegetables, while children huddle nearby, sharing body heat and watching attentively. Outside, the snow glistens across the fields, broken only by the tracks of animals returning to shelter. Researchers note that monitoring these tracks allowed villagers to anticipate potential issues, from wandering livestock to predatory animals, providing vital information for both safety and resource management. You trudge past a barn, noting how smoke escapes from a tiny vent, signaling warmth within. A curious detail is that some farmers would position small bundles of straw near windows to catch sunlight, creating micro-heated zones for delicate plants or the seedlings they hoped would survive the winter. Inside, blankets are adjusted around beds and chairs, and straw mats are fluffed to retain heat. Unusual observation indicates that families often rotated straw and textiles throughout the day, ensuring consistent warmth and preventing damp spots that could lead to illness. The eldest child assists by moving a heated stone beneath a blanket, learning the subtleties of thermal management that will serve them well throughout the cold months. Academic discussion continues around whether these methods were passed down consciously as formal knowledge or learned primarily through observation and imitation. You trudge to the hearth, observing the delicate choreography of fire maintenance. Logs are rotated to maintain even heat, embers coaxed carefully without exhausting fuel. Folklore claims that maintaining a fire in a particular sequence or direction could influence household fortune, a belief that intertwined superstition with practical survival strategies. The gentle hiss and crackle of the fire fill the room, a constant rhythm that underpins the household's morning activities. The aroma of stew mingles with smoke and the faint scent of wool, creating a sensory map of comfort and routine. Evidence suggests that such combined sensory cues were vital, not just for physical warmth, but for mental well-being, providing reassurance in a season defined by cold and scarcity. You notice the children absorbing every detail: where to adjust blankets, when to move closer to the hearth, and how to position themselves to maximize heat while avoiding danger from the fire. Outside, a thin layer of frost sparkles on roof shingles and hedgerows. Observation suggests that villagers used these small details to predict the severity of the next frost or the likelihood of a thaw, informing decisions about feeding animals, rationing fuel, or adjusting bedding. You trudge carefully over the yard, noticing the faint sounds of snow settling and distant animals stirring, a subtle symphony of winter life. Interestingly, some households would place a small container of warm water near the doorway to melt ice or snow, preventing accidents and conserving energy that would be lost in scrubbing frozen surfaces later. Inside, the family moves with synchronized care. The mother ladles stew into wooden bowls while the father shifts logs, the children adjusting blankets and mats. Experts observe that this cooperative choreography was essential. Without coordination, warmth would dissipate, energy would be wasted, and the household could suffer undue strain during long cold periods. You notice how every action seems instinctive yet purposeful, a reflection of countless repeated winters and acquired knowledge. Smoke from the hearth curls around hanging herbs, releasing faint fragrances that blend with cooking smells. Records indicate that rosemary, the sage, and thyme were often used not only for flavour but also for their perceived protective properties against illness and bad spirits. You trudge past these herbs, noting the careful arrangement, a subtle balance of practicality, psychology, and tradition. A curious detail is that some families would weave small bundles of these herbs into children's clothing, believing it offered protection while also keeping garments fragrant in damp, smoky air. You step to the window and observe the distant fields, pale and uniform under snow. Historical insight shows that visual assessment of fields and livestock was as critical in winter as indoor management, allowing villagers to plan work, allocate resources, and anticipate threats. You notice faint traces of footprints and hoof marks, evidence of activity that maintains life even under harsh conditions. Some sources suggest that reading these signs was a form of informal education, teaching observation, prediction, and strategic thinking from a young age. Inside, the household settles into a gentle rhythm. Children eat small portions of stew, sharing the warmth of the fire and body proximity. Observation suggests that this interplay of food, fire, and social closeness enhanced endurance, allowing families to maintain both health and morale. You watch the adults move deliberately, balancing movement and heat. Entering the environment remains comfortable while conserving energy. The fire crackles, the aroma of stew fills the air, and light glints faintly off frost-laden surfaces. Folklore claims that if the hearth is kept in balance with careful rotation of logs and stones, the household will avoid misfortune during the harshest nights. You notice the subtle synchronization logs adjusted, blankets rotated, children positioned optimally for warmth. Evidence suggests that this intricate network of actions allowed medieval households not only to survive but to thrive during winter, balancing physical comfort, psychological stability, and practical resource management. And as the morning deepens, you realize that each element, the fire, the textiles, the meals, the subtle rituals, and attentive observation forms a coherent system. Historical insight shows that these routines, refined over generations, are a testament to human adaptability, ingenuity, and quiet resilience, ensuring that even in the coldest months, life persists, warmth endures, and knowledge passes forward. You trudge back to the hearth, noticing the delicate interplay of movement and warmth that defines life in the cottage. Children sit close to the fire, small bodies curled in layers of wool, while adults adjust blankets and straw mats to ensure comfort throughout the room. Historical insight shows that such deliberate arrangements of people, textiles, and heat sources were vital for maintaining body temperature during long, harsh nights. You observe the rhythm of activity tending the fire, preparing meals, and repositioning bedding, all orchestrated to preserve warmth and conserve energy. Outside, the frozen yard glistens under pale sunlight, the snow reflecting light into low windows. Researchers note that monitoring the environment, even in small ways, helped families anticipate threats to livestock, frozen water, or icy paths. You trudge carefully through shallow drifts, observing faint footprints of neighbors and animals, reminders that life continues in quiet persistence. Interestingly, some villagers would mark paths with small sticks or stones to guide movement safely through treacherous terrain, a subtle adaptation that required careful observation and local knowledge. Inside, the stew simmers gently, sending up fragrant plumes that mix with smoke from the hearth and the earthy smell of straw mats. Evidence suggests that aromas were not merely sensory but played a psychological role, reassuring inhabitants of safety, warmth, and sustenance. You watch as the mother adjusts the positioning of children near heated stones, while the father rotates logs and checks embers. Observations indicate that these small adjustments created a dynamic microclimate, allowing heat to circulate evenly and preventing cold spots that could compromise comfort or health. You trudge to the window, peering out at the distant fields where frost-covered hedgerows create intricate patterns. Folklore claims that the shapes and thickness of frost could predict the severity of upcoming cold nights, guiding farmers in rationing fuel and adjusting bedding. You notice the faint smoke curling from neighbouring chimneys, a visual cue that other households are engaging in similar routines, a coordinated network of adaptation across the village. A curious detail is that some families would hang small bundles of herbs near windows to filter the air and provide faint warmth, blending practicality with superstition. The children shift slightly, adjusting their positions and blankets, their small bodies instinctively seeking maximum warmth. Researchers note that early exposure to cold and observation of household routines trained children in energy conservation and thermal management. You watch the eldest child assist the youngest, rotating blankets and fluff straw, learning the unspoken choreography that sustains comfort and survival. Evidence suggests that this hands-on training formed an essential part of winter education, imparting knowledge that formal lessons could not replicate. You trudge around the hearth again, noting the subtle layering of warmth embers, heated stones, textiles, and shared body heat combining to create a stable environment. Some sources suggest that families continuously refine these practices over generations, experimenting with materials, fire placement, and body arrangement to maximize efficiency. The smoke rises gently, mingling with the aroma of stew and herbs, creating a sensory map that signals safety, productivity, and care. Outside, snow crunches softly under a distant passerby, while animals shift and low softly in pens. Observations indicate that villagers relied on careful environmental monitoring, judging temperature, wind, and snow conditions to plan activities for the day. You notice a neighbour adjusting a small bundle of firewood near a doorway, an improvised windbreak that preserves warmth inside and keeps supplies dry. Interesting, some households even rotated bundles of straw in storage to prevent freezing or damp accumulation, a subtle technique learned through long experience. Inside, the family continues to move with coordinated precision. The mother lifts a bowl of stew to the table. The father rotates a heated stone beneath a blanket, and children adjust their positions to capture heat. Researchers note that this interplay of food, warmth, and movement was critical in preventing illness, conserving energy, and sustaining morale through long winter mornings. Evidence suggests that such synchronization was often tacit, taught through observation, imitation, and repetition rather than formal instruction. The fire crackles softly, light flickering across timber walls and straw-covered floors. Folklore claims that maintaining balance between fire, textiles, and human positioning could protect the household from misfortune or cold-related ailments. You notice how each movement, rotating a log, repositioning a blanket, adjusting a child's posture, is intentional and harmonized with surrounding activity. A curious detail is that some families even used small patches of warmed earth under mats to add gentle, sustained heat throughout the room. You trudge one last time around the interior, observing how the combination of sensory cues, human coordination, and environmental adaptation sustains both comfort and endurance. Historical insight shows that households that mastered these patterns could survive long winters without exhausting resources or succumbing to cold-related illness. You realize that what appears mundane is, in fact, an intricate system of observation, adaptation, and subtle human ingenuity. And as the morning progresses, you sense the quiet effectiveness of these routines. Food, fire, textiles, and bodies working together in synchrony to create warmth, safety, and continuity. Evidence suggests that this multi-layered approach allowed medieval families to endure winter nights with resilience, comfort, and careful foresight. blending practical skill with centuries of accumulated knowledge. You trudge outside again, stepping carefully over icy ruts and compacted snow. The village roads are almost invisible beneath the frozen layer, with only faint traces of footprints and sled marks hinting at human activity. Historical insight shows that medieval roads were often poorly maintained in winter, and villagers had to navigate treacherous paths with deliberate caution, balancing speed with safety. You notice the low walls and hedgerows that provide some shelter from the wind, their frost-laden branches glinting faintly in the pale sunlight. You trudge along a frozen lane toward the neighbour's barn, observing subtle signs of life smoke curling from chimneys, the muted shuffle of animals, and the occasional sound of metal scraping against wood as tools are used with care. Researchers note that such cues were essential for understanding the village's rhythm, allowing farmers to anticipate when to move animals, collect supplies, or check shared water sources. Interestingly, some villagers would place small bundles of straw near paths to guide travellers safely, a practice blending practicality and local knowledge passed down over generations. Inside the barn, the smell of hay, warm animal breath, and damp wood is strong but comforting. You notice cows and goats huddling together, their bodies pressed closely to conserve warmth. Evidence suggests that animals not only provided heat but also required careful management to ensure survival during harsh nights, with feeding and bedding adjusted based on temperature and snow depth. You'd observe the farmer moving methodically, topping up troughs with water and distributing straw bedding in layers, a choreography tuned to both comfort and efficiency. You trudge back toward the cottage, noticing that even minor details of movement are calculated to conserve energy and retain heat. Some sources suggest that villagers would prioritize tasks by energy expenditure and proximity to heat sources, performing the most demanding chores while warmed by the fire and lighter activities nearer the hearth. A curious detail is that small heated stones or warmed clay tiles were sometimes placed beneath sleeping mats to provide steady heat for children or elderly members, a simple yet effective innovation. Inside the cottage, the fire glows warmly, casting flickering shadows across timber walls and straw mats. Researchers note that managing indoor heat was a continuous process, with logs rotated, embers raked, and heated stones adjusted to maintain an even distribution. You observe the mother stirring a pot of pottage while the father shifts blankets and fluffs straw beneath the children. Observation suggests that such coordination, though largely unspoken, was critical in sustaining comfort, preserving energy, and preventing illness. You trudge to the window, looking out across frost-covered fields. Folklore claims that the direction of smoke from chimneys could signal approaching weather, a belief that influenced daily routines, such as whether to bring animals inside early or adjust bedding layers. You notice faint tracks in the snow leading toward distant barns and cottages, each one a subtle indicator of life continuing despite the cold. Historical insight indicates that villagers closely monitored these signs, blending observation with experience to maintain survival. Back inside, the children sit quietly near the hearth, adjusting blankets and watching the fire. A curious detail is that some families place small bundles of herbs in strategic locations around beds and seating areas, believing that the aroma could protect against illness or misfortune while also adding comfort. You notice the subtle synchronization the fire has attended. Straw is fluffed, bedding rotated, and meals prepared with minimal waste of heat or energy. Evidence suggests that these routines were refined over generations to create a seamless rhythm of warmth and care. You trudge toward the table where pottage is served, its steam curling into the air, carrying the scent of cooked grains, herbs, and preserved vegetables. Researchers note that hot meals were critical for maintaining body heat, especially for children and older adults. The placement of bowls, blankets, and heated stones reflects careful observation, optimizing both comfort and efficiency. You watch as everyone moves deliberately, coordinating actions to prevent drafts and maximize the retention of warmth. Outside, A gentle wind stirs snow along hedgerows, while smoke from neighbouring cottages rises in lazy spirals. Observations indicate that coordination among households was subtle but important, with shared knowledge about road conditions, animal movement, and weather helping each family adapt to the environment. You notice a neighbour carefully stacking firewood near a door, small motions that reflect deep experience and attention to detail. Interestingly, even the order of stacking could influence airflow and the longevity of the logs, a minor yet impactful consideration. Inside, the household continues its quiet, deliberate rhythm. Evidence suggests that the interplay of fire, textiles, heated stones, meals, and social coordination formed a comprehensive system for enduring winter nights. You observe how children learn these patterns through imitation. Adults maintain them through experience, and the cottage becomes a microcosm of human adaptation. Every motion, sound, and scent contributes to a carefully balanced environment that blends warmth, efficiency, and continuity. And as the morning stretches into midday, you realize the depth of knowledge embedded in these routines. Historical insight shows that the careful orchestration of indoor heat, animal placement, fuel management, and social coordination allowed medieval families not merely to survive but to sustain life, comfort, and resilience throughout the harshest seasons. You sense the quiet triumph in this rhythm, a blend of instinct, ingenuity, and observation that has endured for generations. You trudge through the cottage, noting a shift in the atmosphere as winter continues its slow, persistent grip. The hearth crackles steadily, casting warmth across walls lined with straw mats and hanging herbs. Historical insight shows that consistent fire maintenance was essential for both survival and comfort, providing warmth that could reach every corner of the room while preventing damp from settling into floors and bedding. You notice the children tucked close together, hands and cheeks flushed from shared body heat, absorbing the subtle lessons of winter survival by watching each adult's movements. Outside, frost glimmers faintly on roof shingles and hedgerows, the snow silent except for distant animal tracks. Researchers note that observing environmental cues like frost thickness, wind direction, and snow texture allowed villagers to anticipate changes, whether in temperature, weather, or animal behavior. You trudge carefully along the yard, noting faint paw prints and footprints that hint at the constant movement of life despite the cold. Interestingly, some households would place small bundles of straw near doors and windows to act as makeshift windbreaks, reducing drafts and preserving interior warmth with minimal effort. Inside, the mother stirs a pot of thick broth, sending up fragrant steam that mingles with the earthy scent of straw and the smoke from the fire. Evidence suggests that hot, nutrient-dense meals were critical, particularly for children and older adults, as they provided energy necessary for maintaining body temperature. You notice the subtle coordination. The father rotates logs in the hearth while the mother adjusts blankets. Each action is designed to sustain comfort and avoid unnecessary heat loss. A curious detail is that some households would tuck warmed stones beneath straw mattresses before bedtime, a simple yet effective strategy to prolong warmth through the night. You trudge toward a small window, watching the sun reflect softly off icy fields. Observations suggest that the timing and quality of light influenced household routines, guiding when to tend animals, fetch water, or begin cooking. You notice a neighbour's smoke curling upward, signalling similar routines occurring across the village. Folklore claims that if smoke rises straight and steady, it's a sign of fair weather, whereas twisting or curling smoke warns of impending storms, a practical blend of observation and superstition. Inside, the family moves with deliberate care. Children stretch, adjusting blankets and shifting closer to the hearth. Researchers note that these movements, combined with layering textiles and positioning near heat sources, create an integrated thermal strategy that maximizes comfort while conserving energy. You observe how even small adjustments, like rotating straw mats or moving a child closer to a heated stone, are part of a carefully refined practice honed over generations. You trudge to the corner where small bundles of herbs hang from the ceiling. Historical insight shows that herbs such as rosemary, thyme, and sage serve dual purposes, flavoring food and offering perceived protection against illness. You notice the way the mother brushes past them, releasing gentle fragrances into the room. A curious detail is that some families would tie herbs into small pouches and place them under pillows or near beds, believing the scents provided not only comfort but also protection from unseen and winter ailments. Outside, the wind rustles through trees, carrying faint sounds of distant animals and the occasional creak of a gate. Evidence suggests that villagers relied heavily on these ambient cues, interpreting subtle changes in sound or movement as indicators for adjustments to chores or household positioning. You trudge carefully, noting how frozen paths and icy surfaces dictate movement and force every action to be measured and intentional. Inside, the children now assist with minor tasks. One carries a small bundle of firewood closer to the hearth. Another adjusts blankets around a sibling. Researchers note that these early lessons in managing warmth, movement, and energy expenditure were crucial for building resilience and preparing the next generation for long winters. You notice how every movement reinforces habits, an unspoken education in observation and survival. The fire crackles steadily, sending embers dancing across the hearth. Folklore claims that the sequence in which logs were placed and rotated could influence household fortune and health, blending practical thermal management with cultural belief. You observe the adults coordinating subtly, sharing space with the children and animals to maintain optimal heat while continuing daily routines. You trudge back toward the center of the room, taking in the entire scene, warmth radiating from the hearth. The aroma of herbs and broth, soft murmurs of conversation, and the gentle shuffle of bodies adjusting for comfort. Evidence suggests that such a multi-layered approach, combining textiles, food, fire, and social coordination, formed the foundation of winter endurance in medieval households. You realize that every movement, scent, and arrangement reflects generations of observation, experience, and adaptation, a quiet testament to human ingenuity in the face of relentless cold. And as the morning stretches further into the pale daylight, the household continues its deliberate rhythm, blending work, observation, and warmth into a seamless flow. Researchers note that these carefully orchestrated routines allowed families not only to survive but to thrive, maintaining comfort, health, and social cohesion throughout the harshest months. You trudge toward the children's sleeping area, noticing how they have learned to adapt to the cold almost instinctively. Blankets are layered thickly over straw-filled mattresses, each fold arranged to maximize insulation. Historical insight shows that sleeping arrangements in medieval households were deliberately designed to conserve heat, with younger children placed near adults or even small animals to benefit from shared body warmth. You watch the youngest child tuck in a small goat, its soft warmth contributing to the overall temperature of the room. Outside, frost clings to hedgerows and fence posts, glinting in the weak sunlight. Researchers note that villagers closely observe these natural markers to anticipate temperature changes, adjusting both human and animal activity accordingly. You trudge along the edge of the yard, noting faint tracks in the snow, signs of livestock movement and neighbors attending early chores. Interestingly, some families would spread straw over narrow pathways to create insulated trails for children and animals, reducing exposure to the cold and minimizing energy lost to slipping or shivering. Inside, the fire crackles, providing steady warmth. Evidence suggests that proximity to the hearth was critical for both comfort and health, especially for children whose smaller bodies lose heat more quickly. You watch the eldest child carefully reposition blankets and mats, learning the precise placement that maximizes warmth while allowing room for movement. A curious detail is that some families would tuck small bundles of heated stones beneath children's bedding, providing long-lasting warmth without continuous fire tending. You trudge to the window and peer outside, observing the muted landscape. Folklore claims that frost patterns could indicate the severity of the next cold snap, guiding decisions about which animals needed extra bedding or which roads should be avoided. You notice smoke rising from neighbouring cottages, a signal that others are maintaining similar routines, creating a shared rhythm of adaptation across the village. Observation suggests that this interconnection of households reinforce survival strategies and communal knowledge. The children stirred gently, adjusting positions and curling closer together. Researchers note that these early experiences teach resilience, energy management, and observation skills essential for survival. You see how even the smallest adjustments, tucking a blanket under an elbow, moving a child closer to a heated stone, or nudging a goat slightly, are purposeful and carefully learned over time. Evidence suggests that these practices were largely passed down through observation and imitation rather than formal instruction. Inside, the mother rotates logs in the hearth, maintaining an even heat distribution. Historical insight shows that continuous attention to fire, even during periods of relative inactivity, was critical in sustaining a stable indoor climate. You notice how the father fluffs straw beneath the children and adjusts their blankets, ensuring that warmth radiates evenly throughout the room. A curious detail is that in some households, small bundles of herbs were placed strategically near children to provide both a comforting scent and a subtle antiseptic effect. You trudge around the room again, observing the coordinated movement of people, animals, and objects. Researchers note that thermal management required constant awareness, from seating arrangements near the hearth to the placement of bedding and firewood. You watch how each adult and child has an intuitive understanding of these arrangements, a practical knowledge honed over repeated winters. Interestingly, even the angle at which blankets are folded can affect airflow and heat retention, a small but significant detail in enduring cold nights. Outside, the snow continues to shift with the wind, creating quiet patterns and small drifts around the cottages. Observation suggests that monitoring these changes informed daily decisions about livestock, travel, and fuel usage. You trudge back toward the hearth, noting how the family balances work and warmth, ensuring comfort while conserving energy. Folklore claims that children who learn to respect fire and positioning early in life are more likely to endure the winter with health and strength, a reflection of how tradition blends with practical experience. Inside, the family maintains a gentle rhythm. The children now move more confidently, adjusting their blankets and positioning themselves for optimal warmth. Researchers note that these routines, combining heat sources, shared body warmth, and careful observation, created a sustainable system that allowed even the youngest and most vulnerable household members to thrive. Evidence suggests that the habits learned during these early mornings shaped resilience, perception, and survival skills crucial for long winters. You trudge one final time around the room, absorbing the balance of heat, movement, and sensory cues. The fire crackles steadily, herbs release their subtle fragrance, and the children nestle comfortably in their layers. Historical insight confirms that these multi-layered strategies, textiles, fire, heated stones, shared body warmth, and observation formed the foundation of winter survival, a system refined over generations to endure harsh nights while maintaining comfort and health. And as the morning continues, the household moves with quiet coordination, a delicate interplay of warmth, care, and vigilance, teaching the children lessons that extend beyond survival into skill, observation, and resilience. Observation suggests that these practices were the backbone of enduring medieval winters, blending practical knowledge, inherited wisdom, and subtle ingenuity into daily life. You trudge toward the kitchen once more, noticing how warmth and sustenance are inseparably intertwined in the household. The fire crackles in the hearth, its heat radiating across walls lined with hanging herbs, straw mats, and rough timber. Historical insight shows that medieval families relied on consistent meals, particularly warm broths and mild alcoholic drinks, to maintain body heat and energy. You watch the mother lift a small pot of spiced ale from the embers, handing cups to the adults before the children, a subtle hierarchy dictated by endurance and need. Outside, frost glistens on fields and fences, reflecting pale sunlight that barely penetrates the low winter sky. Researchers note that villagers interpreted these patterns to anticipate shifts in temperature, snow accumulation, or the possibility of ice forming in animal troughs. You trudge carefully along the frozen yard, noting footprints of neighbors and livestock alike, subtle traces that communicate timing, movement, and survival strategies. Interestingly, some families would preheat stones near the doorway, placing them to melt snow from boots and provide small localized warmth as people entered. Inside, the children sit near the fire, hands cupped around wooden bowls filled with warm pottage. Evidence suggests that even small meals played a dual role, supplying both nutrition and psychological comfort, the aroma and heat reinforcing the perception of safety. You notice the eldest child moving blankets closer to the younger ones, subtly adjusting mats and layering straw to optimize warmth. A curious detail is that some households would tuck small heated stones into children's bedding before the meal, creating an additional buffer against the chill. You trudged to the window, observing smoke spiraling from distant cottages. Folklore claims that the direction and density of smoke could indicate weather conditions or impending frost, guiding households in rationing fuel and food. You notice how neighbors' movements correspond with these cues, a subtle communal awareness that governs activity and survival. Observations suggest that this shared knowledge reinforced social cohesion, while simultaneously enhancing individual households' ability to endure cold. The fire crackles gently, and the mother begins slicing small pieces of bread for the children. Researchers note that food management, combined with careful heating and layering of textiles, created a system in which energy and warmth were preserved optimally. You watch the father rotate embers, ensuring even heat distribution, while the children mimic small adjustments around the hearth, gradually learning the household strategies for thermal efficiency. Evidence indicates that this subtle education was crucial for building resilience and competence in younger generations. Outside, a soft wind stirs snow along hedgerows, carrying faint scents of wood smoke and herbs. Historical insight shows that these environmental cues were part of an ongoing observation, informing decisions about animal care, travel, and preparation for nighttime temperatures. You trudge around the yard, noting the careful placement of firewood, animal bedding, and paths to minimize exposure while maximizing warmth retention. A curious detail is that some families layered straw along paths, not only for insulation but also to guide animals safely across icy or uneven ground. Inside, the family moves in quiet synchronization. The children pass utensils, rotate blankets, and adjust straw mats with subtle guidance from the adults. Researchers note that these activities reinforce the household's layered thermal strategy, balancing body heat, fire warmth, and insulation through textiles. You observe the way adults subtly shift positions and rotate logs, ensuring that energy is preserved and warmth is distributed evenly throughout the space. Interestingly, some households would keep small trays of heated stones near sleeping areas, allowing children and the elderly to regulate their own warmth during moments of rest. You trudge toward the hearth again, absorbing the intricate choreography, fire tending, meal preparation, blanket adjustments, and small movements of children and animals. Evidence suggests that the integration of heat sources, food, and observation created a resilient system that allowed households to endure long periods of extreme cold. You notice the faint aroma of cooked herbs mingling with smoke, a sensory cue that reinforces comfort, signaling that despite harsh conditions, life continues safely and rhythmically. Outside, the landscape shimmers with frost and subtle shadows. Observations suggest that constant monitoring of environmental and domestic conditions was essential for survival, as shifts in temperature, wind, or snow could quickly affect livestock, water, and fuel. You trudge carefully, noting how minimal adjustments outdoors correspond to significant energy preservation indoors. Folklore claims that mindful attention to these patterns ensured safety and longevity, linking tradition with practical adaptation. Inside, the family settles more comfortably around the fire, with blankets layered and heated stones positioned for maximum effect. Historical insight shows that these repeated practices were critical for building endurance, comfort, and stability over prolonged winters. You notice how every movement, every adjustment, and every small action reflects generations of accumulated knowledge, an intimate understanding of heat, observation, and human resilience. And as the morning advances, the household continues its rhythm of coordinated movement, warmth, and sustenance, demonstrating the careful balance between human effort, environmental cues, and survival strategies. Researchers note that these routines, repeated and refined over centuries, allowed families not only to endure winter nights but to maintain comfort, health, and social cohesion throughout the harshest months. You trudge back toward the sleeping area, noting the careful arrangements that allow warmth to persist through long nights. Blankets are layered precisely over straw mattresses, while children nestle close together to share body heat. Historical insight shows that sleeping positions and huddling strategies were crucial in conserving warmth, particularly for the youngest and oldest household members. You notice the father adjusting a small heated stone beneath a child's blanket, a subtle measure that radiates gentle warmth through the night without continuous fire tending. Outside, snow drifts along hedgerows and fence lines, sparkling faintly under weak sunlight. Researchers note that villagers paid close attention to such environmental cues, observing wind patterns, frost formation, and snow consistency to guide household routines and animal care. You trudge carefully across a frozen path, noting the footprints of neighbors and livestock alike, which served as informal indicators of movement and activity in the village. Interestingly, some households would place straw or rushes along paths for both insulation and traction, helping children and animals navigate icy surfaces safely. Inside, the hearth crackles with a steady warmth, the aroma of simmering pottage mingling with the faint scent of herbs and smoke. Evidence suggests that hot, nutrient-rich meals were essential not only for energy, but for thermoregulation, allowing children and adults to maintain core temperature during periods of inactivity. You notice the mother stirring the pot while simultaneously checking the straw mattresses, coordinating tasks seamlessly to optimize heat and efficiency. A curious detail is that some families would wrap small bundles of warmed stones in cloth to place at the edges of beds, creating localized heat zones for added comfort. You trudge to the window and watch the distant fields, faintly etched by snowdrifts and frost patterns. Folklore claims that careful observation of frost and ice formation could predict the severity of upcoming cold spells, guiding decisions about fuel usage, animal bedding, and household routines. You notice smoke curling from neighboring cottages, indicating that similar practices and precautions are occurring across the village. Observations suggest that such communal awareness reinforced survival strategies while fostering a quiet sense of coordination among households. Inside, the children shift slightly, adjusting their positions under blankets and moving closer to heated stones. Researchers note that these subtle adjustments were part of an informal education, teaching young villagers the principles of energy conservation, warmth management, and observation of environmental cues. You notice how even the smallest movements, tucking a blanket, shifting a mattress, or positioning a heated stone, are deliberate, forming patterns passed down through generations. Evidence suggests that these practices were highly effective, creating an environment in which children could remain warm and healthy even during extreme winter conditions. The mother moves carefully around the hearth, adding small logs to maintain an even fire. Historical insight shows that consistent management of the hearth was crucial, balancing fuel conservation with sufficient heat output for both comfort and health. You notice the father adjusting blankets and straw, ensuring that warmth radiates evenly, while children observe and imitate these careful movements. A curious detail is that some households would use layers of animal fur along walls or beds, not only for insulation but also to mask the damp, smoky odours of indoor life during winter. You trudge back toward the centre of the room, observing the choreography of daily survival, tending the fire, adjusting blankets, preparing meals, and managing children and animals. Researchers note that such coordination required careful attention and experience, a tacit knowledge system, refined over generations. You notice the subtle ways in which warmth is distributed, with strategic placement of people, textiles, and heated stones to create a comfortable, sustainable environment. Interestingly, the sequence in which straw was fluffed or blanket layered could dramatically influence perceived warmth, a detail that speaks to the ingenuity and observation skills of these families. Outside, the wind stirs faintly through the snow-laden trees, while distant smoke marks other cottages alive with movement and heat. Evidence suggests that these quiet observations of environmental and social cues were essential in forming household decisions about when to feed animals, tend fires, or perform essential chores. You notice how even minimal exposure to cold was mitigated through careful planning and placement of heat sources. Inside, the household maintains its rhythm. Children pass utensils, blankets are adjusted, and heated stones are rotated to keep temperatures consistent. Folklore claims that households that mastered this delicate balance would avoid misfortune and illness during the harshest nights, a belief blending practical survival with cultural tradition. You watch as each movement, each adjustment, contributes to a carefully managed environment, a system of warmth, care, and resilience perfected over generations. And as the morning continues, the family's routine flows seamlessly, combining food, heat, textiles, and observation into a cohesive system. Researchers note that these practices were central to enduring winter nights safely, sustaining not only physical warmth but also the social cohesion, skills, and subtle wisdom necessary for long-term survival in medieval households. You trudge toward the kitchen area again, where the fire burns steadily and fills the room with warmth and light. The aroma of simmering pottage mingles with smoke and faint herbal scents from bundles hanging above the hearth. Historical insight shows that heat, food, and sensory cues work together to sustain both physical endurance and psychological comfort during long winter days. You notice the children leaning close to the fire, hands wrapped around wooden bowls of stew, while the adults adjust blankets and straw mats to optimize warmth for everyone. Outside, the snow glistens faintly on the frozen fields, and faint tracks indicate the movement of neighbors and livestock. Researchers note that careful observation of these signs allowed villagers to anticipate the flow of activity, the approach of visitors, or the potential need to protect animals from wind or frost. You trudge carefully across the yard, noting subtle changes in the snow and ice that would inform decisions about travel and daily chores. Interestingly, some families would line narrow walkways with straw or rushes, creating insulated paths that preserved warmth and improved traction for both children and animals. Inside, the mother stirs the pot while glancing at the children, subtly coordinating multiple tasks at once. Evidence suggests that such multitasking was vital for efficiency, As households had limited fuel and time to complete essential activities before the cold intensified, you notice the father adjusting logs in the fire and moving heated stones beneath blankets, distributing warmth carefully to every corner. A curious detail is that some households would rotate heated stones among bedding throughout the day, a practice that allowed long-lasting heat without exhausting the firewood supply. You trudged to the window and observed the faint smoke spirals rising from distant cottages. Folklore claims that smoke patterns could indicate weather changes, guiding villagers in rationing fuel, adjusting bedding, or preparing animals for colder temperatures. You notice neighbors moving in rhythm with these cues, a subtle communal awareness that reinforces survival strategies and shared knowledge without verbal communication. Observation suggests that these small cues helped households anticipate the challenges of long, cold days and respond effectively. The children adjust their positions near the hearth, curling under blankets and straw mats. Researchers note that learning these positioning strategies at an early age taught energy conservation, thermal awareness, and subtle observational skills. You watch as the eldest child assists the youngest, moving blankets and adjusting straw, absorbing knowledge through observation and imitation. Evidence indicates that this hands-on approach created resilience, ensuring that children could endure cold nights independently as they grew older. Inside, the mother adds small herbs to the simmering pot, releasing fragrances that permeate the room. Historical insight shows that herbs were valued not only for flavor, but for perceived protective qualities, providing psychological reassurance in a season dominated by cold and scarcity. You notice the father checking embers and rotating logs, maintaining a steady temperature without unnecessary consumption of fuel. A curious detail is that some households would hang small bundles of herbs or rushes above the fire to filter smoke and subtly improve the indoor air quality. You trudge around the hearth again, observing the precise choreography of household activity tending the fire, stirring meals, adjusting bedding, and moving children and animals for optimal warmth. Researchers note that this integration of tasks, heat sources, and movement created a sustainable thermal environment that allowed households to endure long periods of severe winter weather. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, such as repositioning a heated stone or folding a blanket differently, could significantly improve comfort. Outside, the snow shifts slightly under a soft wind, muffling sound and creating a serene, almost dreamlike atmosphere. Observation suggests that this quietness allowed villagers to monitor small cues like animal movements or distant smoke that influenced decisions about outdoor tasks and resource allocation. You trudge back inside, noting how the household's combined awareness of environment, fire, and social coordination ensures survival and comfort simultaneously. Inside, the family maintains its rhythm. Children pass small utensils, adults adjust blankets, and the fire is tended continuously. Folklore claims that households maintaining this careful balance of warmth and observation were believed to avoid illness and misfortune during the coldest nights. You notice how every movement, every placement of straw, blankets, or heated stones contributes to a seamless system that sustains warmth, health, and cohesion throughout the household. And as the morning progresses, the family continues this careful choreography of food, fire, textiles, and observation. Evidence suggests that such well-practiced routines allowed medieval households to thrive during winter, combining practical knowledge, inherited skill, and subtle ingenuity to create comfort and resilience against the harshest conditions. You trudge toward the storage area, noticing how carefully supplies are managed to withstand the harshness of winter. Barrels of grain, root vegetables, and preserved meat are stacked strategically to prevent freezing and spoilage. Historical insight shows that thoughtful storage and rotation of food were essential to survival, allowing families to ration wisely and sustain energy during long, cold months. You observe the mother inspecting the contents of a barrel, brushing off frost and ensuring nothing is damp, while the children assist by carrying small portions closer to the hearth for cooking. Outside, the landscape glimmers under pale sunlight, the snow thick yet silent, muffling movement and sound. Researchers note that villagers often monitored environmental conditions, such as wind direction and frost accumulation, to plan outdoor tasks efficiently and avoid unnecessary exposure. You trudge along the edge of the yard, noticing faint animal tracks and subtle shifts in the snow, small indicators that inform everyday decisions. Interestingly, some households would use straw or rush mats to insulate stored food, maintaining a slightly warmer microclimate that preserved provisions longer. Inside, the hearth radiates heat, and the smell of simmering pottage blends with smoke and herbs, creating a comforting atmosphere. Evidence suggests that heat from the fire, combined with well-positioned food storage and careful handling, maximized efficiency while preventing cold-related spoilage. You notice the father adjusting a heated stone beneath a sleeping child's blanket and subtly moving logs to maintain consistent warmth across the room. A curious detail is that some families place small bundles of dried herbs between food layers, believing they help preserve flavor and deter pests. You trudge to the window, watching distant cottages, each sending smoke into the crisp winter air. Folklore claims that smoke patterns could indicate household activity, weather changes, or even livestock needs, allowing families to adjust routines accordingly. You notice neighbors moving with purpose, carrying small loads of firewood or checking animals, demonstrating a coordinated understanding of seasonal pressures. Observations suggest that these cues, combined with visual signs from frost and snow, created a network of awareness essential for communal survival. Inside, children sit close to the fire, adjusting blankets and straw mats to retain warmth. Researchers note that these movements taught energy conservation, thermal awareness, and attentiveness, essential skills for survival during extreme cold. You watch the eldest child reposition a heated stone for a younger sibling, learning how to balance comfort and heat efficiently. Evidence indicates that this form of practical education ensured resilience and self-sufficiency for future winters. The mother stirs the pottage, releasing a comforting aroma that fills the room. Historical insight shows that food, fire, and sensory cues work together to maintain both physical and mental well-being. You notice how the father rotates embers carefully, balancing fuel consumption with optimal warmth. A curious detail is that some households would layer straw between logs and fire bricks to retain heat longer, an improvised technique reflecting careful observation and experience. You trudge around the hearth once more, observing the quiet rhythm of household management, rotating firewood, distributing heat, adjusting bedding, and monitoring children and animals. Researchers note that these subtle but continuous adjustments created a reliable system for warmth and efficiency, enabling the household to endure harsh conditions without exhausting resources. Interestingly, even minor repositioning of a heated stone or blanket could dramatically improve thermal comfort, demonstrating the cumulative effect of small adaptations. Outside, a gentle wind rustles snow along hedgerows, while distant animals stir softly in pens. Observations suggest that villagers combine these environmental cues with household routines to optimize daily activity, protect resources, and conserve energy as you trudge back inside, noting how every element, fire, textiles, food, children, and animals, is interdependent, forming a cohesive network of warmth and survival. Inside, the family moves with subtle coordination. Children pass small utensils, blankets are adjusted, and the fire is maintained, blending practical action with learned instinct. Folklore claims that attentive observation of these routines protects households from misfortune, illness, and cold-related ailments. You notice how every adjustment, no matter how minor, reinforces the household's resilience, demonstrating the accumulated knowledge and ingenuity that sustains life through winter. And as the morning continues, the household maintains its rhythm of warmth, food, and observation. Evidence suggests that these carefully practiced routines, refined across generations, allowed families to endure long winters successfully, blending observation, skill, and subtle ingenuity into daily survival. You trudge toward the barn, noticing the muted sounds of animals shifting in their stalls. The soft rustle of straw under hooves and the gentle lowing of cows fill the cold air with a subdued rhythm. Historical insight shows that closer monitoring of livestock was essential during winter, as frozen water, stiffened feed, and limited mobility could quickly threaten animal health. You observe the farmer carefully moving bales of hay, layering them to provide both insulation and easy access. Outside, frost glints along fence lines and hedgerows, reflecting pale light across the frozen yard. Researchers note that villagers interpreted these subtle environmental cues to make decisions about when to tend animals, collect firewood, or perform other essential tasks. You trudge carefully, observing faint footprints and hoof prints that reveal both the timing and scale of recent activity. Interestingly, some households would create small insulated paths of straw for livestock, reducing exposure to freezing surfaces while allowing them to move safely between shelter and feeding areas. Inside the barn, the air carries a rich mixture of hay, animal warmth, and faint moisture. Evidence suggests that proper ventilation, combined with insulation, helped prevent respiratory issues among animals while maintaining ambient warmth for humans nearby. You notice the farmer adjusting blankets over a resting goat and shifting bales of straw for chickens, a subtle choreography designed to conserve heat and energy. A curious detail is that some families would place warmed stones beneath bedding for the youngest animals, a simple but effective way to extend comfort without extra fuel. You trudge to the doorway and glance across the frozen fields, noticing distant cottages with thin smoke plumes. Folklore claims that the behavior of smoke, animals, and frost together could predict the severity of coming days, guiding decisions on fuel allocation and bedding adjustments. You see neighbors checking their own barns, quietly reinforcing the collective awareness that survival required careful observation, timing, and adaptation. Observation suggests that this interconnected vigilance was vital for ensuring both individual and communal resilience. Inside the cottage, the hearth crackles as the family prepares the next meal. Researchers note that alternating duties, fire tending, food preparation, and animal care allowed the household to balance energy expenditure while maintaining warmth. You observe the children helping where they can, adjusting blankets and moving straw for small animals, learning both responsibility and the subtle science of heat management. Evidence suggests that these repeated patterns, practiced daily, ensured both comfort and endurance through extended periods of cold. You trudge to the window, watching the snow shift faintly in the wind. Historical insight shows that environmental observation, from wind to snow accumulation, was a critical skill for timing chores and minimizing exposure. You notice how smoke spirals from chimneys across the village, creating a visual network that helped villagers coordinate activity and anticipate needs. A curious detail is that some families would hang small bundles of herbs in barns to mask odors and provide subtle warmth, a practice blending practical care with traditional beliefs. Inside, the family continues its quiet rhythm. Children pass tools, blankets are adjusted, and heated stones are rotated beneath mats. Researchers note that this continuous micromanagement of heat, textiles, and body placement created a sustainable system that allowed households to endure severe winter conditions efficiently. You notice the subtle coordination among all members, an unspoken choreography honed over generations to maximize comfort and safety. Interestingly, even the sequence of tasks, rotating straw, adding logs, checking animals, could significantly affect thermal efficiency, a nuanced skill passed through observation. Outside, animals shift in their stalls, softly moving to conserve warmth, while faint footsteps in the snow indicate neighbors tending their own livestock. Observation suggests that constant awareness of animal behavior, weather patterns, and human activity allowed villagers to anticipate problems and adapt accordingly. You trudge back inside, noticing how each element, fire, textiles, heated stew, and careful placement of animals interacts to create a coherent, resilient system. Inside, the family settles near the hearth once more. Folklore claims that attentive care of both humans and animals during winter nights preserved fortune and health, blending practical wisdom with cultural tradition. You notice the quiet harmony, the children close to warmth, the adults coordinating care, and the animals positioned to contribute to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these routines, when followed consistently, allowed households to endure winter nights with safety, comfort, and minimal resource waste. And as the morning moves onward, the rhythm of chores, fire tending, and animal management continues seamlessly. Researchers note that this integration of observation, practical skill, and careful coordination formed the backbone of medieval winter survival, ensuring that families, children, and livestock alike could endure the season with resilience and warmth. You trudge back into the main living space, noticing how the warmth from the hearth flows outward, filling the room with steady heat. Blankets and straw mats are carefully arranged, with children nestled close together, sharing body warmth. Historical insight shows that such deliberate spatial arrangements maximized heat retention, ensuring that the youngest and most vulnerable household members remained comfortable. You watch as the mother adjusting a heated stone beneath a blanket, a subtle measure that extends warmth through the room without increasing fuel consumption. Outside, the wind moves softly across snow-laden fields, carrying faint sounds of distant livestock and occasional footsteps. Researchers note that monitoring these environmental cues helped villagers predict weather changes and adjust their daily routines accordingly. You trudge along a narrow path, noticing faint animal tracks and frozen puddles, subtle indicators that guide both household and community activity. Interestingly, some families would place straw along paths to insulate the ground, making movement safer for children and animals, while also reducing exposure to the bitter cold. Inside, the hearth crackles gently, casting flickering shadows on walls lined with herbs and textiles. Evidence suggests that combining heat from fire with insulation, heated stones, and body warmth created a sustainable thermal environment capable of supporting a household for long winter days. You notice the father rotating embers and the mother adjusting blankets around the children, each action carefully calibrated to maintain comfort. A curious detail is that some households would position bundles of herbs near sleeping areas, believing their scent helped stave off illness while providing psychological reassurance. You trudge to the window, observing distant cottages sending smoke into the cold air. Folklore claims that patterns of smoke, wind, and frost together could indicate incoming weather, guiding villagers in decisions about fuel allocation, feeding animals, and layering bedding. You notice neighbors moving with deliberate care, reinforcing a shared awareness of environmental cues and communal survival strategies. Observation suggests that this network of information allowed households to respond efficiently to changing conditions while conserving energy. Inside, the children adjust their positions, curling closer together and pressing against heated stones. Researchers note that these adjustments teach important lessons in thermal awareness, energy conservation, and observation from an early age. You watch the eldest child assist a younger sibling, adjusting blankets and straw for optimal comfort. Evidence suggests that such early practical education was critical, instilling skills necessary for enduring winter nights independently as they grew older. The mother stirs the pottage gently, releasing aromas that blend with smoke and straw. Historical insight shows that food, warmth, and sensory cues collectively reinforced physical endurance and mental comfort. You notice the father ensuring embers are steady and blankets remain in place, balancing energy conservation with consistent warmth. A curious detail is that some households layered straw beneath floor mats to create an insulated barrier against cold seeping from the earth. A simple yet effective method of retaining heat. You trudge around the hearth again, observing the quiet rhythm of household activity tending the fire, distributing heat, adjusting bedding, and managing children and animals. Researchers note that this integration of tasks and heat sources created a reliable system for warmth and efficiency, enabling families to endure extreme winter conditions. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, such as shifting a heated stone or folding a blanket differently, could have a measurable effect on comfort, highlighting the accumulated knowledge embedded in these practices. Outside, snow drifts softly over hedgerows while animals shift in pens, conserving heat. Observations suggest that villagers combined these subtle environmental cues with household routines to optimize activity and energy usage. You trudge back inside, recognizing how each element — fire, textiles, heated stones, and strategic placement of people and animals — works together as a cohesive system that sustains warmth and survival. Inside, the household continues its quiet rhythm. Folklore claims that families maintaining careful attention to both humans and animals during winter nights could avoid illness and misfortune. You notice the subtle coordination: children positioned for warmth, adults rotating embers, and blankets adjusted to create pockets of comfort. Evidence suggests that these multi-layered routines ensured endurance, comfort, and safety throughout the harshest periods of winter. And as the morning deepens, the family maintains its steady rhythm, integrating heat, food, and observation into a seamless system. Researchers note that these long practices allowed households to endure winter months successfully, combining practical knowledge, inherited skill, and subtle ingenuity into daily life. You trudge toward the pantry, noticing the careful organization of winter provisions. Barrels of grain, jars of dried fruits, and bundles of root vegetables are stacked neatly, each item placed to avoid damp or frost. Historical insight shows that strategic food storage was crucial, allowing families to ration efficiently and maintain energy throughout long, cold months. You observe the mother checking the contents of a barrel, brushing off frost, while the children carry small portions closer to the hearth for cooking, learning the subtleties of resource management. Outside, frost sparkles on hedgerows and fence posts, and distant smoke rises from cottages across the village. Researchers note that such environmental cues inform decisions about daily tasks, like when to tend livestock, fetch water, or collect firewood. You trudge carefully along the yard, noticing faint footprints and animal tracks that provide subtle information about movement and timing. Interestingly, some households laid straw or rushes along frequently traveled paths to insulate the ground, keeping it safer and warmer for both people and animals. Inside, the hearth radiates warmth, while the aroma of simmering stew fills the room. Evidence suggests that combining heat from the fire with heated stones, textiles, and body proximity allowed households to maintain a comfortable and sustainable temperature throughout the day. You notice the father rotating embers, the mother adjusting blankets around the children, and small animals nestled near the fire, each contributing to the household microclimate. A curious detail is that some families would place small bundles of dried herbs in sleeping areas, believed to protect against illness, while adding subtle fragrance to the room. You trudge to the window, observing distant cottages and frozen fields. Folklore claims that the thickness and shape of frost could predict the severity of coming cold nights, guiding preparations for bedding, animal care, and fuel usage. You notice neighbors moving with purpose and a subtle coordination across the village that reinforces communal survival. Observations suggest that this attention to environmental detail was essential for balancing daily activity with energy conservation and resource management. Inside, the children adjust their positions near the hearth, curling under blankets and pressing against heated stones. Researchers note that these small adjustments teach thermal awareness, energy management, and observational skills crucial for enduring cold nights. You watch the eldest child reposition blankets for a younger sibling, learning through practice how small changes can optimize warmth. Evidence suggests that these early lessons built resilience and practical knowledge that would last through future winters. The mother stirs the stew, releasing warm aromas that mingle with smoke and straw. Historical insight shows that sensory cues like smell, heat, and sound reinforced comfort, helping maintain morale and focus during long winter days. You notice the father monitoring embers, ensuring consistent heat while adjusting blankets to maintain even warmth. A curious detail is that some households would place heated stones beneath floor mats, a simple adaptation that allowed children and elderly members to maintain warmth throughout the night. You trudge around the hearth, observing the coordination of fire, textiles, and human movement. Researchers note that this constant micromanagement created a reliable system for sustaining comfort and efficiency. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, such as folding a blanket differently or moving a heated stone slightly, could significantly improve thermal comfort, demonstrating the accumulated wisdom embedded in these routines. Outside, snow drifts quietly across hedgerows, while animals shift slightly in their pens to conserve warmth. Observations suggest that monitoring environmental and household cues together allowed villagers to respond efficiently to changing conditions, preserving energy and safety. You trudge back inside, noting how every element, fire, textiles, heated stones, and strategic positioning of people and animals interacts to form a cohesive system for warmth and survival. Inside, the household moves with quiet precision. Folklore claims that attentiveness to both human and animal comfort during winter nights protects the family from misfortune and illness. You notice subtle coordination, children positioned near heat sources, adults managing fire and bedding, and animals contributing to the overall warmth. Evidence suggests that these combined strategies ensured endurance, comfort, and resilience throughout the coldest month. And as the morning advances, the family continues its careful rhythm of observation, warmth, and resource management. Researchers note that these long practice routines allowed households to thrive during winter, blending practical skill, inherited knowledge, and subtle ingenuity into daily life. You trudge back into the living area, noticing how the warmth from the hearth extends gently through the room, touching every blanket, mat, and body. Historical insight shows that careful placement of textiles, heated stones, and fire sources created a microclimate within the household, allowing even the youngest and oldest members to maintain comfort through frigid mornings. You watch the children nestle together under layered blankets, small hands clasped around wooden bowls of warm pottage, learning by instinct how to retain heat and conserve energy. Outside, the snow glistens faintly under the weak winter sun. Researchers note that villagers paid careful attention to environmental cues such as frost thickness, wind direction, and the subtle crunch of ice underfoot, using these signs to plan animal care, fire tending, and essential daily tasks. You trudge across the yard, noticing faint tracks of neighbors and livestock, subtle indicators of movement and survival strategies throughout the village. Interestingly, some households lined frequently traveled paths with straw, creating insulated corridors that allowed children and animals to move safely while reducing heat loss and exposure. Inside, the fire crackles gently, its glow illuminating walls lined with herbs, textiles, and straw mats. Evidence suggests that combining heat from the hearth with body warmth and heated stones created a reliable system for sustaining comfort over long periods. You notice the mother adjusting blankets and layering straw for the children while the father rotates embers, a delicate choreography aimed at distributing warmth efficiently. A curious detail is that some families would place small bundles of herbs under pillows or near beds, believing that their scent would protect against illness while subtly warming the air. You trudged to the window, observing smoke rising from distant cottages. Folklore claims that the direction and density of smoke could indicate both weather changes and the activity of neighbours, guiding decisions about fuel use, bedding arrangements, and animal care. Observation suggests that shared environmental awareness enhanced community resilience, allowing families to anticipate problems and adjust routines accordingly. You notice neighbours moving deliberately, stacking firewood, or checking barns, demonstrating a subtle, collective system of winter survival. Inside, children shift under blankets and heated stones, learning through imitation how to maximize warmth while minimizing energy expenditure. Researchers note that early exposure to these practices taught practical thermal management, observation skills, and self-sufficiency, forming an essential part of a child's education in winter survival. Evidence suggests that these lessons created a household culture in which every member understood the delicate balance of heat, movement, and comfort. The mother stirs the pottage, releasing rich aromas that fill the room with reassurance. Historical insight shows that combining sensory cues with warmth and sustenance reinforced both physical endurance and psychological comfort during extended periods of cold. You notice the father monitoring embers and adjusting heated stones, ensuring even distribution of heat. A curious detail is that some households layered straw beneath floor mats to insulate against cold seeping from the ground, a subtle but effective method for retaining warmth throughout the day. You trudge around the hearth, observing the subtle, continuous adjustments, rotating logs, adjusting blankets, monitoring animals, and coordinating children's positions. Researchers note that these small, repetitive routines formed a reliable system that sustained warmth and comfort with minimal energy loss. Interestingly, even minor changes in placement or sequence could have significant effects on perceived heat, showing the sophistication of household management. Outside, snow shifts gently with the wind, while animals shuffle in pens to conserve warmth. Observation suggests that monitoring animal behavior and environmental changes simultaneously allowed villagers to make strategic decisions about feeding, bedding, and energy use. You trudge back inside, noticing how each element — fire, textiles, heated stones, meals, and body placement — interacts in a cohesive network that supports both comfort and survival. Inside, the family continues its rhythm. Folklore claims that those who maintain careful attention to household warmth, animal care, and observation during winter nights will thrive without misfortune or illness. You notice subtle coordination: children positioned near heat sources, adults rotating embers, blankets adjusted, and animals contributing to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these combined strategies ensured endurance, warmth, and resilience throughout the harshest periods of winter, and as the morning advances, the household maintains a seamless rhythm of heat, food, and observation. Researchers note that these long practices allowed families to survive and thrive during winter months, blending inherited knowledge, practical skill, and subtle ingenuity into daily life. You trudge toward the barn, noticing how carefully the animals are settled for the day. Hay is layered thickly, animals huddle together to share warmth, and the smallest creatures are placed near heated stones or straw-lined corners. Historical insight shows that careful attention to livestock during winter was essential, as their health directly influenced both nutrition and household energy. You observe the farmer gently moving a young goat closer to the fire, while the children watch and imitate the actions, absorbing practical lessons about thermal management and care. Outside, snow glints under the weak winter sun, and wind shifts it lightly along hedgerows and fences. Researchers note that villagers observe these subtle environmental cues to anticipate weather changes and determine the safest times to carry out chores. You trudge along a frozen path, noticing faint footprints that reveal the movements of neighbours and animals, each small trace serving as an indicator for planning daily activity. Interestingly, some households would create insulated corridors of straw between barns and cottages, reducing exposure to the cold while allowing children and animals to move safely. Inside the barn, the air carries the mixed scent of hay, animals, and subtle warmth. Evidence suggests that proper insulation and careful ventilation maintained comfort for both humans and livestock, minimizing health risks and conserving energy. You watch the farmer adjust straw bedding and rotate heated stones, ensuring that warmth is distributed evenly. A curious detail is that some households would tuck heated stones into small stalls to provide localized warmth for young or weak animals, a simple yet effective method passed down through generations. You trudge to the window and notice distant cottages, their chimneys releasing thin spirals of smoke. Folklore claims that observing smoke patterns and animal behavior together could predict temperature drops or incoming storms as guiding decisions about fuel rationing, bedding, and animal care. Observations suggest that this form of communal awareness allowed villages to coordinate activity and share subtle strategies for survival without direct communication. Inside, the children move carefully around the animals, adjusting straw mats and repositioning themselves near heated stones. Researchers note that these practices instilled early lessons in observation, responsibility, and energy management. You notice the eldest child assisting a younger sibling, demonstrating how small adjustments to bedding, blankets, and proximity could maximize warmth. Evidence suggests that such hands-on experience built resilience and self-sufficiency that would carry them through harsh winters in the future. The mother stirs a pot of broth in the nearby kitchen area, its aroma mixing with the scent of straw and animals. Historical insight shows that combining heat, food, and strategic placement of objects and bodies created a layered system of comfort and energy conservation. You notice the father checking embers and rotating logs, balancing warmth with efficiency. A curious detail is that some households layered straw beneath mats or along walls to create subtle insulation zones, demonstrating careful observation and adaptive ingenuity. You trudge around the barn, observing the coordinated movements of adults, children, and animals. Researchers note that this constant attention to detail created a sustainable, self-regulating system of warmth and survival. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, such as moving a heated stone slightly or shifting a mat, had measurable effects on comfort, revealing the depth of tacit knowledge embedded in everyday routines. Outside, snowdrifts shift gently with the wind while animals shuffle quietly. Conserving heat, observations suggest that constant attention to environmental cues and animal behavior allowed villagers to manage risk and energy effectively. You trudge back inside, observing how every element, fire, bedding, heated stones, body placement, and animals contributes to a coherent network of warmth and survival. Inside, the family continues its careful rhythm. Folklore claims that attentive care of both humans and animals during winter nights protects against misfortune and an illness. You notice subtle coordination: children near heat sources, adults tending fires and blankets, and animals contributing to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these combined practices sustained warmth, endurance, and resilience through the most challenging winter days. And as the morning progresses, the household maintains its steady rhythm, blending heat, food, observation, and care into a seamless system. Researchers note that these long-practiced strategies allowed medieval families to endure winter months successfully, demonstrating the effectiveness of cumulative knowledge, practical skill, and subtle ingenuity. You trudge back into the main living space, noticing the subtle interplay of warmth, textiles, and human presence. The fire in the hearth glows steadily, heat across the room, while blankets and straw mats are carefully layered to retain maximum warmth. Historical insight shows that combining body heat with heated stones, fire, and insulating materials allowed medieval families to endure long, frigid mornings with minimal fuel consumption. You watch the children nestle close together, hands and cheeks warmed by shared proximity and the gentle heat radiating from the hearth. Outside, frost glints faintly on hedgerows and frozen fields, while snowdrifts shift softly in the breeze. Researchers note that villagers closely observe these subtle environmental cues to anticipate changes in temperature, snow accumulation, and wind direction, informing daily routines and animal care. You trudge along the edge of the yard, noticing faint footprints and paw prints that indicate movement and activity, small signs used to plan both work and survival. Interestingly, some families would lay straw along frequently travelled paths, creating insulated corridors that reduced exposure and minimized heat loss for both children and animals. Inside, the aroma of simmering stew mingles with smoke and the earthy scent of straw. Evidence suggests that combining heat, food, and strategic positioning of bodies created a sustainable system for warmth, comfort, and energy conservation. You notice the mother stirring the pot while simultaneously adjusting blankets and fluffed straw beneath the children, a subtle coordination that ensures heat is distributed evenly. A curious detail is that some households would tuck small bundles of herbs under pillows or near beds, believing their scent could protect against illness while providing a gentle warming effect. You trudge to the window and observe neighbouring cottages, smoke curling gently into the cold air. Folklore claims that the direction and shape of smoke could indicate upcoming weather changes, guiding households in rationing fuel, adjusting bedding, and tending animals. Observations suggest that this communal awareness allowed families to anticipate challenges and respond efficiently without direct communication. You notice neighbours moving carefully, stacking firewood or checking barns, maintaining a rhythm that complements their environmental observations. Inside, children adjust their positions near heated stones and blankets, learning the subtle balance between proximity to heat and comfort. Researchers note that these small movements taught early lessons in thermal management, energy conservation, and careful observation, forming a practical education for surviving winter. Evidence suggests that the eldest children often guided younger ones, reinforcing skills and ensuring that knowledge of warmth management passed seamlessly through generations. The mother stirs the stew again, releasing warm aromas that fill the room with reassurance and comfort. Historical insight shows that sensory cues like smell, firelight, and warmth reinforce both mental and physical resilience during long winter days. You notice the father rotating embers and adjusting heated stones, maintaining even heat while conserving fuel. A curious detail is that some households layered straw beneath floor mats or along walls, creating subtle insulation zones that preserved warmth throughout the day. You trudge around the hearth, observing the synchronized movements of family members and animals. Researchers note that this constant coordination created a reliable system for warmth, energy efficiency, and household comfort. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, such as repositioning a heated stone or folding a blanket differently, could dramatically improve perceived heat, demonstrating the depth of practical knowledge embedded in daily routines. Outside, snowdrifts shift quietly in the wind while animals shuffle in their pens, conserving warmth. Observations suggest that careful monitoring of animal behavior and environmental cues allowed villagers to anticipate and mitigate cold-related challenges. You trudge back inside, noting how every element, fire, textiles, heated stones, body placement, and animals works together in a cohesive system that sustains warmth, comfort, and survival. Inside, the family continues its steady rhythm. Folklore claims that households maintaining careful attention to warmth, observation, and animal care during winter nights avoid misfortune and illness. You notice subtle coordination in every action, children positioned optimally for heat, adults tending fire and bedding, and animals contributing to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these combined practices ensured endurance, comfort, and resilience throughout harsh winter days, and as the morning unfolds, the household maintains its careful flow of heat, observation, and resource management. Researchers note that these long-practiced routines allowed medieval families to thrive during winter months, blending practical skill, inherited knowledge, and subtle ingenuity into daily life. Yuba trudge back toward the pantry, noticing how carefully every item is stored and layered for the long winter months. Barrels of grain, jars of preserved vegetables, and bundles of root crops are arranged to prevent freezing and moisture accumulation. Historical insight shows that strategic storage was essential, allowing families to ration food efficiently and maintain energy during the coldest days. You watch the mother inspect the contents of a barrel, brushing off frost and transferring portions closer to the hearth for cooking, while the children observe and imitate her movements, learning the subtle skills of household management. Outside, frost glints along fences and hedgerows, and the snow shifts lightly with a gentle wind. Researchers note that villagers relied on these small environmental cues to anticipate weather changes, adjust animal care, and determine the safest times for outdoor chores. You trudge along a narrow path, noticing faint tracks left by neighbors and livestock, which provide subtle indicators of movement and timing. Interestingly, some households lined these paths with straw to insulate the ground, making travel safer and warmer for children and animals alike. Inside, the hearth crackles steadily, filling the room with warmth that radiates across blankets, mats, and bodies. Evidence suggests that the combination of fire, heated stones, and close proximity allowed households to maintain a stable temperature even during extended periods of cold. You notice the father rotating embers while the mother adjusts blankets and straw beneath the children. Entering heat is distributed efficiently. A curious detail is that some families place small bundles of herbs under pillows or near beds, believing their scent could ward off illness while subtly warming the surrounding air. You trudge to the window, observing smoke spiraling from distant cottages. Folklore claims that smoke patterns, combined with the appearance of frost, could signal weather changes, guiding households in fuel use, bedding adjustments, and care of livestock. Observations suggest that this shared understanding among neighbors created a quiet network of coordination and mutual survival. You notice other families moving with careful intent, stacking firewood or tending barns, reflecting subtle but consistent winter practices. Inside, children adjust their positions near heated stones and blankets, learning the importance of thermal awareness and energy conservation. Researchers note that these small movements provide practical education in survival skills, teaching observation, careful adjustment, and subtle coordination from an early age. Evidence suggests that children observing older siblings or adults absorb knowledge that will serve them throughout harsh winter months. The mother stirs a pot of simmering broth, its aroma blending with the faint smoke and earthy smell of straw. Historical insight shows that combining warmth, food, and sensory cues help maintain both physical endurance and psychological comfort. You notice the father rotating heated stones and adjusting blankets, ensuring even warmth without wasting energy. A curious detail is that some households layered straw beneath mats or along walls, creating subtle insulation zones that preserved warmth across floors and sleeping areas. You trudge around the hearth, observing coordinated movements tending the fire, rotating heated stones, adjusting bedding, and monitoring children and animals. Researchers note that these continuous micro-adjustments created a reliable system for maintaining comfort and warmth throughout long winter days. Interestingly, even minor changes in blanket placement or log rotation could significantly impact perceived warmth, revealing the sophistication of household knowledge. Outside, animals shift in pens to conserve body heat, while distant snowdrifts shift slightly in the wind. Observations suggest that monitoring both environmental and animal cues allowed villagers to optimize activity, preserve energy, and maintain warmth efficiently. You trudge back inside, noticing how each element, fire, textiles, heated stones, food, and body placement works together to create a cohesive system of survival. Inside, the family maintains its careful rhythm. Folklore claims that attention to warmth, observation, and animal care during winter nights protects households from illness and misfortune. You notice the subtle coordination: children positioned near heat sources, adults tending fires and blankets, and animals contributing to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these integrated routines sustained warmth, endurance, and resilience during the most challenging periods of winter, and as the morning progresses, the household continues its seamless flow of heat, food, and observation. Researchers note that these long-practiced strategies allowed medieval families to survive and thrive during winter months, blending inherited knowledge, practical skill, and ingenuity into daily life. You trudge toward the sleeping area, noticing how the household has subtly shifted to optimize warmth. Blankets are carefully layered over straw mattresses, and children huddle together, sharing body heat while small heated stones provide additional comfort. Historical insight shows that these deliberate arrangements were essential for survival, as maintaining body temperature during long, cold nights could mean the difference between health and illness. You observe the elder child adjusting a blanket for a younger sibling, learning how small actions influence overall warmth. Outside, frost glistens along hedgerows and fence posts, reflecting pale sunlight across the frozen fields. Researchers note that villagers carefully monitored these subtle environmental cues to anticipate temperature changes, snowfall, and wind patterns. Adjusting routines accordingly, you trudge along the yard, noticing faint footprints from neighbors and livestock, all indicators that help families plan tasks and conserve energy. Interestingly, some households placed straw along walkways to create insulated paths, reducing exposure to the cold for children and animals. Inside, the fire crackles gently, filling the room with heat that radiates across blankets, mats, and bodies. Evidence suggests that combining fire warmth with heated stones and layered textiles allowed households to maintain stable indoor temperatures for extended periods. You notice the mother stirring a pot of simmering pottage while simultaneously adjusting straw beneath the children, ensuring that heat is distributed evenly. A curious detail is that some families tucked small bundles of herbs under pillows or near sleeping areas, believing that their aroma protected against illness while adding subtle warmth. You trudge to the window, observing neighboring cottages, each sending a thin spiral of smoke into the crisp air. Folklore claims that the direction and density of smoke could signal changes in weather, guiding households in rationing fuel, adjusting bedding, and attending to livestock. Observations suggest that this communal awareness allowed families to anticipate environmental challenges and coordinate routines effectively. You notice neighbors moving with careful deliberation, stacking firewood and checking barns, demonstrating the interdependence of survival strategies across the village. Inside, children adjust their positions under blankets and near heated stones. Researchers note that these subtle shifts taught practical skills in thermal management, energy conservation, and observation from an early age. You observe the eldest child assisting the youngest, learning through imitation how to optimize warmth. Evidence suggests that these early lessons created resilience and self-sufficiency, preparing children to endure harsh winter nights independently. The mother stirs the stew again, releasing warm aromas that mix with smoke and the earthy scent of straw. Historical insight shows that combining sensory cues with heat and food reinforced both physical endurance and psychological comfort. You notice the father rotating embers and adjusting heated stones, maintaining even warmth throughout the room. A curious detail is that some households layered straw beneath floor mats or along walls, creating subtle insulation zones that preserved warmth efficiently. You trudge around the hearth, observing the delicate choreography of household routines tending the fire, rotating heated stones, adjusting blankets, and monitoring children and animals. Researchers note that this continuous attention to detail created a reliable system for warmth and comfort. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, such as repositioning a heated stone or folding a blanket differently, could significantly improve perceived heat, showing the practical knowledge embedded in daily life. Outside, snowdrifts shift quietly while animals shuffle to conserve heat. Observation suggests that attention to environmental and animal cues allowed villagers to manage energy effectively and respond to changing conditions. You trudge back inside, seeing how every element — fire, textiles, heated stones, meals, and body placement — interacts to form a cohesive system of survival. Inside, the family maintains a harmonious rhythm. Folklore claims that households maintaining careful attention to warmth, observation, and animal care avoid illness and misfortune during winter nights. You notice subtle coordination: children positioned for warmth, adults tending fires and bedding, and animals contributing to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these practices sustained endurance, comfort, and resilience during long, harsh winters. And as the morning continues, the household flows seamlessly through routines of heat, food, and careful observation. Researchers note that these long-practiced strategies allowed medieval families to thrive during winter, combining inherited knowledge, practical skill, and ingenuity to create comfort and survival in equal measure. You trudge back into the main room, noticing the quiet efficiency with which the household manages heat, food, and comfort. Blankets are layered strategically over straw mattresses, children nestled close to each other and to small heated stones, while adults rotate embers and adjust textiles to maintain even warmth. Historical insight shows that this combination of fire, insulation, and shared body heat was crucial for survival during long, harsh winter nights. You observe the eldest child gently adjusting a blanket for a younger sibling, a subtle but essential part of maintaining thermal balance. Outside, the snow glimmers faintly in the weak winter sunlight, while the wind shifts it softly along hedgerows and fences. Researchers note that observing these environmental cues helped villagers plan tasks, feed livestock, and manage resources effectively, minimizing exposure to cold and preventing energy loss. You trudge carefully across the yard, noting faint footprints of neighbors and animals, small indicators that allow for careful scheduling of activities. Interestingly, some households would line paths with straw or rushes to insulate against cold and ice, creating safer, warmer walkways for children and animals. Inside, the hearth crackles steadily, filling the room with gentle heat and light. Evidence suggests that the integration of fire warmth, heated stones, and strategic bedding placement allowed households to sustain stable indoor temperatures for extended periods. You notice the mother stirring a pot of broth while adjusting blankets beneath the children, ensuring warmth is evenly distributed. A curious detail is that some families tucked small bundles of herbs near beds, believing the aroma offered protection from illness, while subtly enhancing comfort. You trudge to the window and observe smoke spiraling from distant cottages, signaling activity and warmth. Folklore claims that patterns in smoke, combined with frost and wind, could indicate approaching weather changes, guiding decisions about fuel, bedding, and care. Observations suggest that these subtle environmental cues were integral to communal awareness, helping neighbors coordinate survival strategies even without verbal communication. Inside, children shift positions, curling closer to heated stones and blankets. Researchers note that these small adjustments teach practical lessons in thermal management, energy conservation, and careful observation, forming essential survival skills. You notice the eldest child assisting the younger ones, demonstrating early mastery of positioning and warmth optimization. Evidence suggests that these routines, repeated daily, create resilience and self-sufficiency in the youngest members of the household. The mother stirs the stew again, sending comforting aromas throughout the room. Historical insight shows that sensory cues, combined with warmth and sustenance, enforce both physical endurance and psychological comfort. You notice the father rotating embers and adjusting heated stones, ensuring even heat while conserving fuel. A curious detail is that layering straw beneath floor mats or along walls provided subtle insulation zones, further sustaining comfort with minimal effort. You trudge around the hearth, observing the coordinated movements of adults, children, and animals. Researchers note that this continuous attention to fire, bedding, and body placement created a reliable system for comfort and efficiency. Interestingly, even minor adjustments, like repositioning a heated stone or folding a blanket differently, could have measurable effects on perceived warmth, demonstrating accumulated household knowledge. Outside, snowdrifts shift with a gentle wind, and animals shuffle in pens to conserve body heat. Observation suggests that simultaneous monitoring of environmental and animal cues allowed villagers to manage resources and energy efficiently. You trudge back inside, noticing how every element — fire, textiles, heated stones, food, and body placement — interacts to form a cohesive system of survival and warmth. Inside, the family continues its rhythm. Folklore claims that households paying close attention to heat observation and animal care endure winter nights without misfortune or illness. You notice subtle coordination in all movements: children positioned for warmth, adults tending fires and bedding, and animals contributing to the microclimate. Evidence suggests that these combined strategies ensured endurance, comfort, and resilience during harsh winter conditions. And as the morning deepens, the household maintains a seamless flow of heat, food, and careful observation. Researchers note that these practices allowed medieval families to thrive during winter months, blending inherited knowledge, practical skill, and subtle ingenuity to sustain life, comfort, and survival through the coldest days. The day has settled into a soft rhythm, the cottage bathed in gentle light that filters through frost-lined windows. You notice how every element, from the fire to the heated stove, the layered blankets, and even the subtle movement of the children and animals, works together in quiet harmony. Historical insight shows that these carefully orchestrated practices, repeated day after day, form the foundation of comfort and endurance during long, harsh winters. You can almost feel the warmth seeping into every corner, a gentle reassurance that life continues, steady and manageable. Outside, the wind whispers over snow-covered fields, muffled and soft, while animals shift slightly in their pens to conserve heat. Researchers note that observing these subtle changes in the environment was a skill honed over generations, teaching villagers to anticipate challenges and respond thoughtfully. You breathe in the crisp air seeping in through a small crack, noticing the contrast between the cold outside and the warmth inside. A reminder of the household's ingenuity and care. Interestingly, some families would layer straw or textiles strategically to extend heat retention, a simple yet effective method that speaks to practical knowledge accumulated over centuries. Inside, children stretch and shift, settling into positions that maximize shared warmth. The mother and father move with deliberate calm, adjusting blankets, rotating embers, and monitoring the hearth, maintaining the delicate balance that ensures comfort for all. Observation suggests that this unspoken choreography strengthens social bonds, fosters attentiveness, and teaches resilience through small, repeated acts. You notice the soft crackle of the fire, the aroma of herbs and simmering stew, and the gentle warmth of the sun on frost-glittered surfaces. each sensation layering together to create a sense of quiet security. As the day softens, you feel the weight of stillness and calm envelop the cottage. Folklore claims that households attentive to warmth, observation, and care will endure the harshest nights safely, a blend of tradition and practical wisdom. Evidence suggests that this careful attention, combined with experience and observation, allowed medieval families not only to survive winter, but to sustain comfort, health, and social cohesion. You breathe slowly, noticing the interplay of warmth, light, sound, and scent as it settles over the room. Now, the cottage feels like a living, breathing system, where each movement and adjustment flows naturally, quietly sustaining life. Researchers note that such patterns, repeated through countless generations, exemplify human ingenuity and resilience. You settle into the warmth, letting the soft rhythm of fire, breath, and gentle activity lull you into calm. Outside, snow drifts slowly, muffling sound and stretching the world into a quiet, serene landscape. Everything softens, heat, light, scent, and sound blend into a gentle lull. You can feel how patience, careful observation, and small, deliberate actions shape survival. Evidence suggests that these practices, while ordinary in daily life, created a resilient rhythm that allowed families to endure, thrive, and find peace in the long winter nights. Slowly, all movement becomes still. The fire crackles quietly, the children breathe evenly, and the household rests, warm and secure. You exhale, letting the calm settle deep within, knowing that generations of careful attention and subtle ingenuity have shaped a world in which life continues quietly, steadily, and safely through winter. Sweet dream.